All right, folks, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a little bit of a smaller group today, but we also have a larger group on Zoom right now. So kind of a mix and match. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. There are water fountains. If you go down the hall and to the right, there's like a concessions area and there are water fountains over there. Did not bring the water today, so that was one oversight. Oversight number two for me was I did not bring the gift cards for the stipends. I will go back to my office, or Mark will go to my office and I'll have them back by after lunch at the latest. So if you're not, I have those for those who are not being paid otherwise to be here. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. This is our final session, and it's kind of a bittersweet one for me. This has been very busy for myself, Mandy, David, Chad, Mark. It's been very busy. Megan, who's not here yet, but she'll be here later. However, so it's like, yay, this gets off my plate. But also, I really hope that you are all taking the opportunity that we have here to build connections. All of this is really about relationship building. And so I see you all sitting at tables together. That is great. I want to make sure you pass cards around, change information, right? As we move forward in trying to make Hillsboro a better city. These are the kind of connections that we need to have, right? Is building these relationships so that we can continue the conversation past a facilitated one. Okay. So my name is Marcus Ford. I think you all know that. I'm the community engagement manager for the city of Hillsboro. And I'm waiting for the clicker to click. Oh. Stand by.
Right now.
Cool. All right. If you are on Zoom, you can use interpretation by hitting the globe on the bottom, switching to your preferred language. We have Spanish available and English, which is how we'll be recording. If anybody in this space would like interpretation, there are devices in the back. I don't believe so, but please let me know if you need that. As always, we have our participation agreements. We want to make sure that this is a productive and healthy group. So we participate with intention. We appreciate the diversity of perspectives here in this space. We maintain a respectful space. We create an opportunity for everyone to engage, and we listen to understand. How's the audio for everyone? Good? Cool. All right, so our agenda for that, I'm gonna be walking around, just FYI, because standing by the speakers is weird for me. We're gonna do some centering and introductions. We're gonna talk about the goals for the session. We're going to review what happened at their council sessions on May 2nd and May 16th. And then we're going to talk about the manager's administrative rules, previously called the manager's guidelines that we talked about. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to discuss those and get your input on how those are going to be enacted moving forward. Then we're going to have lunch. We'll be here this time. I did confirm with them, but we'll never know. And then similarly, like we're doing with the administrative rules, we're going to do a review of the FAQs that were created and the fact sheets. And again, getting your feedback and input on that. And then the end, we're going to be doing some, we're going to report out our plan for educating the community about this. But we also want to get some feedback from you all on how we can best inform our community about these changes, updates, where to find this information, all of that good stuff, and how we can continue to receive ongoing feedback, and not just from the same people, right? And from all of our communities. And then we're going to talk about our reflection of the this community engagement process in general, because I would like us to just kind of get better consistently. And then we'll close, and then we'll be done. So I like to start with a quote or some kind of centering exercise, something like that. So the quote today is by Margaret J. Wheatley. Margaret says, "Without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful." And I feel like that is appropriate for today, as we're doing a lot of reflection, talking about what's happened, what we've learned, how your input has impacted the ordinance, and how your impact will continue, or how your input will continue to impact managers, administrative rules, and such. Okay. So for introductions, I'm just going to kind of pass a mic around. I want to make sure everyone's voice is lifted up into the space because all of your voices are important. And I'd just like you to announce your name, pronouns, who you're here representing, and what you hope to get out of this space today. And so I will start. My name is Marcus Ford. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the community engagement manager for the city of Hillsboro. And today I'm hoping to get out, I want feedback on how this process has felt for everybody. That's kind of what's most important to me as the community engagement manager. And so that's something that I really want to get out of the space today.
Hi, everyone. Mandy Goff. I'm the Community Services Coordinator with the City of Hillsboro. I'm transitioning back from maternity leave, so I missed the first two sessions, but I did watch them online and appreciate all the work that's happened from this group. I'm excited to be here today. I use pronouns she, her, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the feedback on the administrative rules, as that's kind of our next hurdle to tackle, is just finalizing those. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Schutz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Family Justice Center of Washington County. And so representing survivors and community partners that provide services to survivors who are at high risk of homelessness. And what I want to get out from today is just hearing what the results were, and then also what the plan for communication is with those communities moving forward.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Barry Johnson Smith. My pronouns are he, his, him. I'm a small business owner and represent the Black Advisory Business Council. The hope to get out of this space today is I'm very intrigued about a discussion around community engagement and kind of figure out how to make sure that all stakeholders, a part of this, who's affected by this camping ordinance, get the information they need to understand what's going on with the updates with it. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Johnson, she, her pronouns. Today, I represent the community and someone with lived experience, also experience with mentor and case management. And what I hope to get out of today is to see what's next.
Good morning, Steve Crouchide, Hillsboro Medical Center, and I hope to get out of it how we're going to communicate this to the community as well as to those experiencing houselessness.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chad Jacobs. I use he, him pronouns. I am the city attorney for the city of Hillsboro. And like Mandy, I'm really interested to hear your feedback on the draft guidelines that we put together for everybody.
Morning, David Vaughn, he, him, with the Hillsboro Police Department's Community Outreach Team. And what I hope to get from this is input on the manager's administrative rules.
I'm Tina Bailey. I use she, her. I am the assistant director for the Public Works Department. And like the rest of city employees, I'm interested in the manager's administrative rules today.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia O'Donnell. I respect all pronouns and representation of downtown neighborhoods, even though they don't know that I'm here all the time. But I'm happy to be here meeting all of you and realizing how crucial and vital this particular ordinance is going to be. My hope today is to hear everything, examine it, and what I see looks good. And my main concern is the communication, because I must say, not everyone is tied to their cell phone or their computer. They do not look at the city newsletter all of the time. So the communication is important. You've got families out there that are raising their children, working nonstop. They come home, have a bite to eat and go to bed. They do not look at the news as much as all of us do. So that is my main concern, the communication with everyone.
Good morning, I'm EJ Payne. I work for the Hillsboro Downtown Partnership, she, her pronouns. I live and work in downtown and advocate for resources to make sure that they're evenly distributed to the old part of our town. So I really hope to get out of this today maybe what happens if people speak up at city council in the next couple of city councils as we go to approve it, like what the process is going to be for reevaluating if there's a lot of representation or if there's different things that are heard that we just haven't heard yet.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Berry. I work for the City of Hillsboro Planning Division. I use he, him pronouns. And the thing that I'm hoping to get out of today, but same hope from the previous two sessions, is just the receiving of the information and the communication. The team that I'm on at the city, we have a counter where the public comes in. Any question not related to specific things usually comes to that counter. And so the planners on our team will likely field a lot of questions about this ordinance. So I think it's useful just to see how the community is receiving and how we will move forward with the communication so that those planners are best suited to answer questions from the community. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Ken Pfeiffer in Parks and Recreation, he, him pronouns. And I'm hoping to understand today just what are the real differences going forward, practically speaking, as it relates to camping compared to what it has been for the past several years, and particularly for parks, obviously, what that means for us and for our staff as we go about our daily work. Thanks.
I'm Matt Delapin. I'm a Hillsboro police officer on the crisis intervention team. I'd like to get a clear understanding of the place where people can legally camp.
My name is Grace Boyle. I'm with the Hillsboro Police Department. I work on the community engagement team as a business liaison. As far as what I'm hoping to get out of this, and any of these 3 sessions, is just any tools that I can use to help any businesses navigate this new ordinance and any houseless individuals that may be camping near those businesses.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Gursky, representing Fire and Rescue. Pronouns he, his, and I'm just like every other government person here, looking forward to understand administrative rules and collective impact.
My name is Daniel, and I use pronouns he and him. I represent the homeless, and what I hope to get out of today is to be the voice for the homeless and make a difference, hopefully.
Hi, my name is Jessica Reyes. My pronouns are she, her. I am the day center manager for Project Homeless Connect, and I'm here representing obviously PHC and houseless individuals as someone that's also had lived experience. What I hope to get out of today is as much information as possible for myself and to better support our guests that come to the day center and to be able to educate them and just help in any way possible.
Good morning, Kim Marshall, she, her pronouns, Project Homeless Connect. What do I hope? I hope, well, I don't know if that's going to happen today, but one of my hopes, and this is across the county, there's so much wording about where people can't be. And even the trifold is restriction, restriction, restriction. I need a better understanding so that we can do our job well of where they can be. And that messaging to our friends is going to be our messaging. We're not going to go down the litany of where you can't be. We're going to tell people where they can be. And that doesn't seem to be represented. So I don't know if that's a hope for today, an outcome of all of this, but I'd like at least to talk that through.
Good morning. My name is Linda Osuna. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm with the city of Hillsboro, Hillsboro Public Library. And what I hope to get out of the space today is similar to what she said. We also want to make sure that we have the right information, the correct information. For many folks in the community, they come to the library as a resource. And so we do have the where nots and the nots, but we also want to give people options and give them the correct information. And then also for more information where we can find that out. So that's it.
All right, thank you. And that's exactly why I asked that question, because there are things that we have planned for in the presentation and the things that we have not. And so maybe with that information, that feedback from you all right now, we'll be able to shift our presentation a little bit to ensure that we're capturing that those specific points that you wanted to hit, and the ones that I didn't clearly know that we had in the presentation I wrote down, so we can refer to those as well. All right, so the goals of this meeting, like I said, we're going to review the administrator's rules and the FAQ and fact sheet. I want everyone to understand the Hillsboro camping ordinance and how to share those changes with our community. And then I want us to be able to reflect on ways to improve this community engagement process. In terms of the kind of experiential goals, I want everyone to feel empowered to speak our truth on this subject. I want folks to think that this ordinance update process was thoughtful and that the CE process, the community engagement process, was transparent. Okay, and then with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful presenters. We have Mandy Goff, David Vaughn, Chad Jacobs, and Megan will be here later, but she's got pieces later.
Okay, so David and I are just going to cover the main changes that have happened to the ordinance itself since you all last saw it. It's gone through several updates. So the first round was updates we made based on the feedback provided in session 2. It then went through 2 city council work sessions, received feedback both times. It also went through internal staff review to just clean things up and have more consistency. So the slides will look similar to what you saw in session 1, which was just education on the ordinance, but I'm just going to highlight the changes that have happened since then. And I think we'll have some time for questions on these slides about the ordinance updates afterwards before we transition into the manager's guidelines. Okay, so this is how the ordinance flows, the various sections of the ordinance. So we've structured it just to go through and share the key updates in each section. The only exception to that is section 6.12 and 9.32, which are the RV and trailer rules and park rules. There really hasn't been significant changes to those sections since you saw the original ordinance. So that's why you won't see a slide on those sections. And we do have the ordinance draft you're seeing in front of you is the most updated clean copy. So feel free to just follow along as we're going to go through it section by section if you'd like. So the first update is to the whereas statements. We got feedback from this group. Well, we made a number of minor language changes, but we got feedback from this group that we should add in some non-discrimination language. So we added that component into whereas statement 1. That we should update the PIT numbers. They are updated to the 2022 point in time homeless count numbers only because we haven't seen the Hillsboro specific numbers for the 2023. If we get those soon, we'll update it to the 2023. And there was also feedback that persons with lived experience should be one of the explicitly called out stakeholder groups in the whereas statement. So we did add that into statement 7.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. What about now? I'm not very good with microphones. So I'm going to cover, what about now?
Yeah.
I'm going to cover definitions that we've made changes to and then private camping locations. So, sorry, getting some feedback. The only change we made with definitions, we changed camp paraphernalia to camp material. It just was a change that made sense. It was also feedback that we got. We also expanded on the definition of recreational vehicle to include non-motorized vehicles. We added a definition for available shelter that's consistent with our other neighboring cities and counties. And it's kind of in the spirit of Martin v. Boise. One thing to keep note of on available shelter is it's individualized for each particular person's set of circumstances. So if there's a religious component that doesn't fit within that person's beliefs or lifestyle, then that would not be available shelter for them. And there's other areas that apply to that. We also added a definition for shelter and then expanded on the definition for motor vehicle. For private camping, this is previous this is previously temporary camping program. We changed it to temporary camping location. The reason behind that is we didn't want to make it seem like it was a program that the city was running. This is with individual private entities, whether it's a property owner, religious organization, or larger private property owner. One thing to remember is time, place, and manner does not apply to this. Time, place, and manner applies to public property. When it came to occupancy for residential property, there was no changes for religious institutions and public agencies. We considered an increase after receiving feedback, but entities can make a request to the manager to expand the occupancy, and those will be considered on a case-by-case basis, specifically taking into consideration the lot size. For solid waste and storage, there's no changes. And then for requirements in the backyard, and we added setback requirements up to 5 feet for concerns for fire and make it consistent with current code. And then we also changed some language in there to avoid establishing a relationship, a landlord-tenant type situation. That was just some feedback and advice that we received also. So the idea behind this is a temporary camping opportunity for individuals, but not an agreement with this, and not a program with the city or an agreement with the property owner to where it wouldn't be a landlord tenant.
Okay. Yeah. So in this next section, it talks about prohibited camping. The only change we made to this first section of it is that we added the term available shelter. So camping that's allowed on public rights of way and on city property would only be available to folks who don't otherwise have available shelter, which is why we added that definition earlier. So it wouldn't just be anyone that was, passing through town, had a place they could stay and just wanted to sleep outside. It's really folks that, based on their individualized circumstances, don't have a shelter bed available. We got some feedback on the time component from this group last time. When you last saw the ordinance, it was sunset to 30 minutes after sunrise. And we heard that we should have some more alignment with what other jurisdictions are doing and have a set specific hours. So those hours landed at 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So we're talking about overnight camping only. And that was where the time landed.
There wiggle room on that?
Let's just get through and then I'll just share, to your point, Kim, a couple of the reasons why. So in our first draft, we had 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. And we took that to council, and there was feedback to make it, for ease of remembering, that we should have the times match, either 8 to 8 or 7 to 7. So that's why we changed it there, thinking that there was also some feedback from Youth Advisory Council students about transiting to school and wanting clear pathways to transit to school and the times that they could do that. And also trying to consider, is it the daylight hours and let's see, how do I explain this? So having people camp earlier when it gets dark would be preferable over, having people camp when it's potentially getting darker earlier. So we thought 7 p.m. would be preferable over 8. And so that was kind of the reasons behind the time, but we can get more into that in questions too. So the next part of the section is on sanctioned camping. And you might recall this is camping that would be allowed by written approval of the manager, with all these amenities in place. And the biggest piece here is that it has to be operated by a qualified entity, someone with experience operating shelters or camps. And so in the code, this just allows for this to happen. It's not setting up a program, but it does allow for that. The only section we added here was if the city manager revokes permission for a sanctioned camp to be their written approval, that camp can appeal to the city council if they feel that was an error. And we had that language up in the private camping section, but it was not included here. So we just felt like there should be consistency between those two sections. On the storage component of the ordinance, last time it read that no storage of personal property is allowed on city property at all. We heard some feedback from this group that we really need to consider daytime storage options and what people really, need to do with their stuff during the day. And so we did open this section to have some storage of personal property in limited amounts on city property, so long as it's not unattended for more than 3 hours and does not take up more space than 5 cubic feet. And so the thought with the 3 hours is that, folks can't be next to their stuff all the time. People have to go and use the restroom. People need to have appointments, and need to go into a service provider. And so we are trying to find a balance between what folks may need to do and may need to leave their stuff for a certain period of time. The feet, the thinking behind that it was essentially the space of like a shopping cart size and a bag, additional bag. And so that's how we came up with the 5 cubic feet. There was no change to the enforcement section of this ordinance. Okay, and the final change was the effective date. So the original language said it would be effective 30 days after its passage. We know we need to have this updated by July 1st. And so the new language says it will just take effect on July 1st. And that's all of the changes for the ordinance, all of the major changes. So I think we can pause here for questions, and David, myself, and I think Chad can also help with questions before we dive into the manager's guidelines, which will go over place and manner. So if your questions are about place and manner, we're going to get to that section next. And I can help pass the mic too.
It's working. It's working. It's not working. It's not working. So you don't need to. I don't need the microphone anymore. I was telling Chad, I love microphones. Love them.
Okay. So I thought it was you, Marcus. I was like, just for clarification, I was going through the ordinance. Just for clarification, would it help if we specified the manager as city manager? Because I think people just picking off of it might say, are we talking about property manager? If it's real clear that city manager, that's who's in charge. And then it might be just wordsmithing, but under the sanctioned campsite must be operated by the city or another local government or jurisdiction maybe instead.
So I'll speak to the manager component, looking through a lot of the different codes within our municipal code. That's pretty consistent with current language. Any other?
So basically the decision was made years ago to use the term manager instead of city manager. So if we want to change that here, we'd have to change it throughout the entire code. So we're just using manager here to be consistent with the rest of the code. So we don't have to do an entire map to the rest of the municipal code.
In the introduction of the municipal code, it is clear that manager equals city manager. Yeah.
Nice start.
And then real quick, sorry, can you ask your second question? I want to make sure that cover that.
So I'm not sure where we're at with this thing, but yes, under C, number 3.A, the city or other local government, the sanctioned campsite must be operated by the city or another local government. Can we change it to jurisdiction? Is there a possibility in the future that some of these campsites will be privatized and operated?
I believe in that part, there's a section for organization with 2 years experience. So I think that's consistent with what we're currently doing, like with Southwest 17th, that's ran by Open Door, that has over 2 years experience. So I think that's pretty consistent with current practice by our city and other cities where we may offer a piece of property that's owned by the city, but ran by an entity like Open Door, or maybe the future Project Homeless Connect for sanctioned campsites. Mandy, another input on that?
Just to clarify, so Linda, are you saying like a business might run it in the future, or private?
I was just thinking, it's very clear the city, right? And other local government, which I understand, but jurisdiction can also be a local government or a private organization with at least 2
Oh, a
years.
non-local. Okay.
So it's just a thing. But that was that.
Okay.
We're doing feedback right now on administrative rules.
Just admin rules.
Just ordinance, yeah.
Could we go back to the slide with that sanction camp information? It just wasn't really clear to me. So I'm looking for the one that said qualified entity. Okay, so this is only sanctioned campsites will be run by city or jurisdiction, right?
So that is section 3. We are just talking about A, B, and C. So there's 3 types of entities that would be qualified to operate. So city or other local government, an organization with at least 2 years experience operating sanctioned campsites or emergency shelters. A nonprofit partnering with another entity described in this section. So I would imagine most likely it would be a nonprofit with experience that would end up operating these, just based on what we've seen in the past.
It just seems to me that we're limiting the people who can help.
Do you have suggested language of
I
what
have
we
to
should
think about
add?
it. Am I the only one seeing it that way? But it seems like we're putting a small box around a big problem.
Is this, Chad, maybe you can weigh in, is this language from state law at all?
Yeah, so the idea here, well, to answer your question directly, I don't think this language comes from state law. I think it's language that's been circulated through several jurisdictions throughout the state who are looking at this. The idea here again is we have multiple levels. We've got people who are just sleeping on public property. We have public who may be going, or people who may be going into camp on someone's private property, so 1 tent or 3 tents, for example, on private properties. And then we're thinking about, potential larger campsites that are not going to be subject to that 1 tent or 3 tent limit. And that's what these sanctioned campsites are. And so the idea behind a sanctioned campsite is we're going to have a larger group of people that you want someone with experience running that kind of campsite to be monitoring and running it. So you're not just opening it to the whole world for someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, to basically create, problems for both the people camping there as well as the broader community, as well as the city trying to enforce it. So that's the idea behind the language. Now, certainly if you have feedback about other entities who would be qualified to oversee that to make sure that it runs smoothly, we could certainly amend this language, but that was the intent behind this language, is to make sure that there's someone qualified who's actually operating it so we don't run into problems.
Sorry about that. Question. Unattended for more than 3 hours. Who's monitoring that?
So the idea, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, is not necessarily that someone is monitoring it like a parking ticket, but it would at least, if David's team goes through, sees an unattended item, and then on their next round through, that it's still there, we have an objective time limit to say, okay, that's past the 3 hours. It's not necessarily that someone's gonna be waiting to jump in at 3 hours. But I assume that would fall under your team. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, Kim, so if you think, me and my team, if you think we're gonna be sitting, watching a person's piece of property, waiting for them to leave and starting the clock, that's not gonna be the case. This is more for the situations where we see carts and other property that is just unattended for many hours, potentially even longer. And gives us an opportunity to better address that.
So
But
what will be done with it?
it depends. It's a case by case basis. If we know who the items belong to, we probably will have a good idea of where they are going. If it's at the day center, if it's somewhere at Open Door, at the library, we'll go chat with them and say, hey, property's been there a bit. Do you want to ride to get there? Do you need any bags? Do you need help facilitating getting moved somewhere else? So we're not going to be sitting and watching the clock and waiting with a truck to take items. We don't want to get in the business of removing people's property just because they're a 1 minute over a 3 hour timeline.
Right. So then are there any proposed solutions for storage?
There's no proposed programming at this time, which I think we need. We lost you. We lost.
It's also like a volume button, so maybe if you're grabbing it down.
So just to repeat that, I was saying that we don't have proposed programming at this time for storage, which in my mind would need to be the solution for that. It's something that's managed, but if there's thoughts about how we could do that, then
always thoughts.
We could talk more.
Time. Yeah, these ordinances are driving me crazy. So 7 PM to 7 AM, what do they do from 7 AM until resources are available? Library opens, day center opens. What's the expectation around that? And then it seems like there was consideration around daylight hours, but in the winter, it is dark long before 7. So could there be consideration for seasonal hours?
So the seasonal component, I think our direction from council was to keep it as easy to remember as possible. I think that's one of the reasons why we got away from sunset sunrise, was because it was so changeable throughout the year and went this direction.
And I understand that, but none of this is easy to remember, so that actually isn't viable. Again, all we've listed is all the places you can't sleep, so we're not actually making it easy. So I'm not following the line of thought on that. Friends, our homeless friends can remember, oh yeah, it's now this to this. I mean, it could be every 6 months if we wanted it to be.
With that, you also.
With that in the summer though, 5:30 in the morning when the sun comes out, it's kind of an unreasonable time to have to wake up.
I'm not suggesting keeping sunrise, sunset, sunset, sunrise. I'm just suggesting that we shift hours, which I fully understand might make it so that it's 5 PM to 7 AM, which I know those hours aren't the same. I think it's okay. I'm just suggesting that we take in consideration when it does get dark and it's dark later in the mornings. And then also the expectation on what our friends are supposed to do during those hours where no resources are available, but they are not allowed to camp.
We're jumping between a lot of sections and not following up on making sure we get the content from everyone. And I think we've had. Please, yes, I can take a hint. If we could just stick with, not on him at all, just like if we could stick with one thing and then it make sure all the feedback, that would be really great, because I've had things I want to say about all things. I think it's going to be.
Okay, and I'll say we should probably only take a few more questions in terms of just time constraints. And I'll turn it over to Cynthia.
I'm gonna use my big girl voice. Oh, sorry. That's the teacher in me. I want to head back to number 3, operated, managed by a qualified entity. The word entity really hurt my ears. I heard the 3, let's see, city run and qualified entities. Who are they and who watches them? I'm always thinking like, who really is the person or people that are that entity? I want to make sure they're qualified, that they're, lawful, licensed, whatever, that we should be doing. There are churches, I'm sure, that want to help health management, but who qualifies them and who's watching it? And then ultimately, responsibly, legally, is the city liable for all of this? Or the state? Who's liable?
So a couple of things, if you want to look at the language in the ordinance itself, and it's in 9.44040 C. That's where we're talking about sanctioned campsites. And if you look at 3, that's where you have your definition of what an entity is. So we don't use the word entity in the ordinance itself when we're describing an organization with experience. We do use the word entity to describe the first 2 when we're talking about a nonprofit who partners with one of those. But the idea is that we have some specific language and some specific requirements related to. So the way the process works is you have a sanctioned campsite where you're going to have permission to do that. If the city's running it and the city's the entity, then the city will be responsible. If the city is not running it, so it's one of these other entities. Sorry to use that word again.
Well, that's why I'm saying. Thank you. That was a good answer. What I want to know is, though, who is watching the other entity? I mean, you've got the city doing their responsibility, and then you have somebody else coming in, but then who monitors that somebody else in our city?
So the city would be responsible for, just like we monitor the private campsites, we monitor the sanctioned campsites. And as Mandy was explaining, we created a process where if the manager revokes the right for someone to have a sanctioned campsite, then they can appeal that up to the city council. So there is a process for the manager to oversee that.
The B, last sentence, exempt from income tax under 501A of the Internal Code or on or before January 1st, 2018. What was the determination of that date?
So I'll have to go back and look at that again. We did not draft this language. This language came from somewhere else, and I'll have to figure out where that came from.
My guess is just reading it and looking at it. I think that's a great catch, Kim, because it's an organization with at least 2 years experience. And so maybe this original language was in 2020.
When this was drafted, that could have been it. Yeah.
That's my guess. So I think we could update that to 2 years from, or at least, or even strike that.
The only reason I bring it up, Mandy, is because this language would disqualify us.
Yeah, no, that's a great catch.
So I just wanted to talk, because I'm bothered, because as we're talking about this, we're talking about these sanctioned camps, and we had a couple different camps in the last few years. So we did the Safe Sleep Village over at the fairgrounds. That went really well, actually, for where we were at. But Wood Street, I don't know how many people are here, I'm sure are familiar with Wood Street, right? Wood Street was inhumane. We had all these things, this is a listing that's required for a sanctioned camp. It was inhumane. It wasn't okay. We had people out there like that. And as we're sitting here talking about this, I'm just thinking, realistically, the majority, 99.9% of these people do not want to be homeless. And it's easy to judge something when we only see a small piece of someone's life, right? So we don't know what got them to where they are. But when we're studying, I just can't help but feeling as we're talking about this, that we're setting guidelines and rules on people on how to live, right? They're humans, right? So we're not helping them, I feel like, in sort of, kind of, but not really. I feel like we're imprisoning people and telling them this is how you have to live. And I guarantee you sanction camps they're not okay.
Since I have it, and I got the other piece is everyone fully understands the part that I think Mandy talked about when there's no available shelter beds, which is pretty consistent, that there's no available shelter beds. So that trumps this, correct? Like that, then this is, yes. Right. So for me, I guess it helps me just fully understand that the frustration with these ordinances, there's going to be moments where it's kind of void because there's not available shelter beds. So we don't have to then, I don't know, enforce some of this.
How are we determining on an individual basis who has an available shelter bed and who doesn't? Because I can tell you the people outside don't.
Also wanted to take this opportunity to just remind folks that this ordinance is not going to solve houselessness. It is not. And
that's what we're doing.
yeah, well, and that's why we love your organizations. But just kind of a reminder that this is specific about the ordinance. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that this ordinance doesn't control.
And I just want to clarify because I may have misheard you, but the idea of an available shelter bed means that if there is an available shelter bed, then someone is actually prohibited from camping outside on city property. And so it's not that if there's available shelter beds that this won't be enforced, that it will be enforced just in a different way. It'll be enforced in a manner that says you're not allowed to camp. And I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page because I didn't necessarily hear that that's what you were saying. So I just want to make sure that that was clear. As far as the individualized basis,
No shelter beds, how does they affect the ordinance?
if there's no shelter beds, then individuals experiencing homelessness or individuals who don't have otherwise available shelter have the ability to sleep outdoors on city property or in the right of way as defined by the ordinance.
I'm kind of confused. So how do we determine if someone has available shelter? So I'm kind of confused on how we determine how someone has an available shelter bed, because when we make those referrals, there's certain things that will automatically say someone can't go. If they're not able to go up and down the stairs, if they're not able to put themselves on the toilet, if they have mobility issues, there's hygiene is even one of those things. If they have problems taking care of their hygiene. So how are we going to say, how are you determining who has it available and who doesn't?
And that's exactly the point I was going to get to, is that under the ordinance, we are required, or David and his team are required to do an individualized assessment, just like you're talking about, to determine the specific factors of that individual, to say, is this place where we think a shelter bed is available actually available to that person? So if they can't do stairs and there's stairs required, then that shelter bed is not available to that person.
Sorry to drill this point, but currently our shelter system requires a 72-hour wait for shelter beds. So if someone gets referred, the shelter provider has to wait 72 hours to give the opportunity for the provider, the outreach teams, the police, someone to identify that person, find out if they can find them before we can call that shelter bed. Like, I'm just.
FYI, we're going to finish up this discussion here, and then we're going to move on to the next section.
Generally speaking, we can call like Salvation Army now, and they have beds that they'll hold for us. So if someone wants a bed, they generally have emergency beds that we can get someone to that night.
I'll be really quick. I thought I had a good idea, but Matt had the one about the Salvation Army, and that's when I was thinking, if there they were in crisis or they weren't eligible, or that 72-hour was too long, then the team, would they be interviewing the individuals and then they'd be able to direct them? And then there'd be like places that the team would know where they could go safely. Just an idea.
I don't know. Because our law enforcement don't have access to HMIS, which is where the wait list sits. So that the map's talking specifically about shelter beds that are held for law enforcement. And so once those are full, then we would be at true capacity.
Out there, in living color. Right. That's so simple.
I would agree with you that if you can define where you can go really, really well, that will be our messaging consistently.
Okay, last piece, and then we're gonna move forward.
In regards to the 7 to 7, Kim, the council talked about this a lot, and I don't know where the other jurisdictions are, and you guys talked about it to the council about where the other jurisdictions are landing with time and trying to be consistent. But I think that brings me to one thing in here about the penalties enforcement and rulemaking, where David started out with, we're talking about compliance and education first. And I know that that's a general practice with code enforcement. But I think that we need to make sure that's really clear to the public that there's a woman sleeping outside my building right now, somewhat blocking the sidewalk, wasn't interested in moving with that. And so like my next step, if she's blocking the sidewalk, would be to call. But that doesn't mean that we're gonna immediately see a change. They're still giving them time and things like that. But I feel like this doesn't stay compliance in it anywhere. And we're trying to help the city set this policy. So if management changes, that the process has to happen again if things get enforced the wrong way. So is there a way that we can put compliance in here? Does that not meet with, or education in here for the individuals that are experiencing homelessness as an expectation of staff before there's enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. So for me, compliance and enforcement are kind of hand in hand. Code compliance used to be called code enforcement, as you probably know. So I mentioned council, we can have compliance without going the enforcement. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be spelled out in the ordinance because it's the way that we operate.
But today, you operate that way today. The police department is totally different than the staff that were there 10 years ago. So this could still be in place 10 years from now. How do we make sure if there's changes in leadership at whatever level, if it's elected officials, that it has to go through the process again? I totally trust that you and your team are doing education and compliance first, but if I looked at this, I wouldn't believe that if I didn't know you guys personally. So I think we can't look at it just like any position on who's in the position now. We have to look at it like who could be in the position in 3 years when you guys all move on to something else, or we have new elected officials, and that we have to go through that again. Because I think even with the hours and all that, it's really you guys are making those decisions. You're gonna know each individual. You're gonna understand what support they're getting. You're gonna be connecting with different resources for them. And then there might be somebody that's really compliant and they're working towards that. And then you've got somebody who's not. But I just want to make sure for our neighbors that are living on the street, that's an expectation that they can expect is education before enforcement. Because this is pretty scary if I didn't have any choice but to live on the street.
I'm trying to think of the best way to respond to that. So to your point, each case is different. And so it's hard to spell out in our ordinance that's going to address every single situation. So it's kind of broad in the ordinance as far as enforcement and penalties. I can't see the future, but the way that our culture is at HPD, It's been that way for the 11 years that I've been there for the most part. Obviously, we change enforcement to compliance, but it's always been the same as far as our approach. And pass over to Matt.
Code enforcement, like, is there?
I can answer this question really easily. So the enforcement aspect would be, we would give someone an exclusion from that area. Before we would exclude them, we would have to give them a warning based on what exclusion process looks like. So there's always going to be a warning. And the way that we're going to operate would be like an informal education, then like a, hey, you're being warned. And then if it came to it, an exclusion.
Is that another code, or is that a police department is that another code, or is that a police department policy?
It's in the municipal code.
It is. Okay. All right. That satisfies me. And I'm gonna ask one more question because the first thing. I am still concerned about the size of property, and I know another of the city council, a couple city councilors brought that up. That 10 people per property. I have a 1/4 acre. There's plenty of room for that. If you have, townhouses, that's a ridiculous amount, and that's going to really impact a neighborhood. So is there some reason that you didn't go with like per acreage or per lot, typical lot size?
So the short answer to that is we have language that allows the city manager to approve additional numbers of people who are allowed to camp based on size. And we thought it'd be easier to use that process than trying to define every situation. The question was, do we notify the neighbors of the request? There's nothing in the ordinance that requires us to notify the neighbors of the request.
10 people per a tiny lot is going to be pretty impactful for neighborhoods like Arbor Roses or something.
And the way we deal with that is to allow the manager to sort of revoke someone's ability to do that if it's having a negative impact on the neighbors, or, we could talk to them about decreasing it. The number 10 is not a magic number. The reason that we came up with that number is we were trying to think of 2 families. What is an approximate good number of 2 families? Since you're allowed to have 1 vehicle or 1/10 that may be housing a second family, that's how we came up with that number 10. Certainly, if you all feedback about a different number, we're happy to consider that. Again, it's not a magic number. That's just the number that the 3 of us came up with, trying to think of what is a reasonable amount, to compensate for all situations.
Unfortunately, Kim, I'm gonna take over now. I'm sorry. I wanted to give an opportunity for anybody that hasn't had a chance to speak yet to ask a question, provide thoughts, anything along those lines. Anybody that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Okay, cool. Here you go, Kim.
Oh, I'm sorry. Marcus is gonna hurt me. No, I actually didn't even realize that was a viable thing, but Chad just said that was one of the things that came up at a listen and learn, was that people asked about allowing people on their property. So I'm just wondering what their name and phone number is.
My name and phone number. All right. So Mandy, if you wanted to take back over, you have the next slides, I believe. Oh, Chad has the next slides.
So now we are, there it goes. Oh, too much. Okay, so now we're going to move to the administrative rules, and these are what were previously called guidelines. And we just switched it to administrative rules because we used a whole bunch of different terms throughout the ordinance. We use administrative rules, we use guidelines, we use regulations. So just to make it all consistent and consistent with the rest of the code, we use the term administrative rules. It doesn't really mean anything different. It's all sort of the same thing. Do you have a question about the guidelines? Or about the rules? So let me just go through them first real quick, like we did with the ordinance, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. So remember, the rules are intended to impose the place and manner restrictions. So what we're allowed to do is do time, place, and manner. As we just talked about, the ordinance itself imposes time restrictions, but it does not impose place and manner restrictions. And so the ordinance says that the manager has to do that through these administrative rules. And so this is what we're doing with the administrative rules. Part of what we're trying to do with the administrative rules is to get further alignment with other jurisdictions on the place and manner. So a lot of what we've included in this draft is similar language that you'll see with our neighbors around Washington County. We do want to provide some flexibility for adjustments during the learning period. So the idea with an administrative rule is that the city manager has the ability to update these without going through the entire formal process of adopting an ordinance. So as we implement this and we realize something's not working, we have the ability to go in and make a quick change as opposed to having to go through the entire legislative process. When we do that, we originally had proposed that any proposed changes, unless an emergency exists, had to be available for at least 5 business days. Based on feedback from the city council, we changed that to 10 business days. So in the ordinance itself, there's language that requires a process for the manager. These original rules to be adopted and in effect for July 1st. Thereafter, any changes have to be posted for at least 10 business days and provide an opportunity for public comment on those proposed changes before they can take effect, unless some sort of emergency exists. Again, these rules are our first draft. We're getting feedback from you all. We'll probably make some changes based on feedback from you all. And then we're going to we have a work session with the city council on June 6th. We'll probably get some feedback during that time as well. Based on all those changes, based on all that feedback, there will be additional changes. And again, the intent is to have these, as the ordinance requires, to have these in effect by July 1st. Okay, so where to camp? So the first thing we're going to talk about is place restrictions. Persons without available shelter can camp on public right-of-way and city property under the ordinance, except where these rules otherwise prohibit. And so what we're trying to do is come up with those places based on feedback that we've gotten from the community and from the council and from you all about where we may want to restrict camping. I do want to point out that we did add language to the rule that allows the manager, without having to actually amend the rules themselves, to exempt certain pieces of property from these overall restrictions and allow those to remain in place for 120 days. So for example, we say you are not allowed to camp in parking lots. If we have a city-owned parking lot where we determine it is okay for people to camp there, we can have on a temporary basis allow individuals to camp in that parking lot for up to 120 days to see how it's working. And then we could formally amend these rules to specifically exempt that parking lot from these camping restrictions. So we did want to provide some flexibility even within the rules themselves to allow us to address changing circumstances, because we just honestly don't know how all this is going to play out. So right now under the draft, as you'll see in the square boxes, we have various proposed restrictions. That would include city buildings, parking lots, and parking structures. For the purposes of city buildings, it doesn't just include the building itself, but it basically includes the entire lot on which the building is located. So, even though you've got, property around the library, for example, doesn't mean you can go camp on the property surrounding the library. The prohibition is going to apply to the entire property on which the city building is located. We have a prohibition on camping in environmentally sensitive areas, near other shelter providers within 500 feet. Within city parks, within the definitions section, though, we define city parks to include those properties that are actively being used for park and recreation purposes. So there are some properties that are technically under the umbrella of the Parks Department that are vacant lots, where we want to have the ability to allow people to camp, based on an individual circumstance. So we're trying to draw that distinction.
I'm just waiting for your hand.
Yeah. We have a prohibition for within 500 feet of an entry or exit to a freeway, within 500 feet of schools, within 50 feet of property being used for residential purposes, within 20 feet of business entrances, and along right of way where the speed limit on the actual street is 45 miles an hour or greater. And a lot of these are created for safety concerns, especially the high speed limits and the freeway entrances and exits. We have a lot of concern about people, basically getting into accidents with vehicles and them not being very well protected. So how to camp, we also have the manner restrictions, and we try to divide this up in two different ways. We've got some overall restrictions that apply to everyone. And then we've got some restrictions that are specific to individuals who are camping in vehicles versus those who are not camping in vehicles, and trying to draw that distinction. Persons without available shelter can camp on public right of way and city property as long as they're prohibited from causing environmental damages. They cannot have open flames. They cannot dump gray water or black water. It actually has them both in there. They have to discard of any waste properly. They can't, in an unauthorized manner, tap into any utilities, and they can't erect structures. You know, the basic idea is individuals can use temporary things such as tents or tarps or things of that nature to protect themselves and keep warm and dry. But we're not, but because we have the time limitations and need people to basically break those down every day, we're not going to have people building structures on city property. So for camping in the right of way, again, we try to distinguish between people camping outside of vehicles versus inside of vehicles. And we want to make sure if you are camping in the right of way that you cannot obstruct sidewalks. As you've probably read, the city of Portland was sued over obstructions of sidewalks, and they're just entering into a settlement agreement this week over that lawsuit. So we want to make sure we're taking an affirmative approach to that to make sure that sidewalks are cleared for ADA accessible issues. We want to make sure that people are also not camping outside of vehicles in the travel lane. So bike lanes, you know, on the actual street itself. There's a lot of danger issues associated with that we want to be careful of. That you cannot be on sidewalks without a curb. Again, you know, the same idea is that, you know, we're trying to make sure that we're not having interactions between people camping outside of vehicles and vehicles driving by and causing injuries. You cannot be under a bridge or within 10 feet of a bridge. Materials that are stored cannot obstruct public or private infrastructure. You know, really what we're thinking about there are things such as fire hydrants and things of that nature that could cause emergency issues. For persons who are in vehicles, they have to park in the right of way where vehicles are allowed to be, which means that, you know, as you drive around, especially Portland these days, you'll see, you know, semi trucks even parked, you know, in areas that aren't in the right of way. So we want to make sure that we're not running into those situations. Again, even if you're parking the vehicles, if you're going to store materials outside of your vehicles, that we don't want you to store those in travel lanes or blocking the sidewalk. Again, those ADA and safety issues. Materials cannot, again, that are stored outside of your vehicle cannot obstruct public or private infrastructure. And that the vehicle itself must comply with all parking or other regulations within the city code. So just because we're allowing you to camp in your vehicle doesn't mean that you get to ignore our other requirements for parking your vehicles.
So before we end this section, I just want to share, we have 3 sample maps. These are not our final map. And I think to your point, Kim, once we nail down where the exceptions of workplace cannot be, we can use the GIS system and the maps to help get to that answer that your team needs. So I will be standing back by the maps during our feedback time to help folks if you need help just looking at those. But in general, we have 3 maps just to give folks a different idea of the different, how the different location exceptions around the city look. The first is all the environmental overlays. So the environmentally sensitive areas that were mentioned are going to be map 1. And they just show you where all our wetlands and floodplains and things of that nature are. Map 2 shows a buffering out of the residential address points as it's currently written in the manager's guidelines, which is essentially any address point that is a residence. There's a 50-foot buffer around that. So you'll see that map is more restrictive than map 3 because it buffers out residential regardless of what zone it's in. The third map shows what it would look like if we just buffered residential zones. And so you can see that there's some zoning coloring behind that, and it shows you what that would look like. I have the note about the business buffer not being on the maps because we actually found with our GIS team that there's no way in our mapping system to tell where the doorway of a business is. It just shows where the tax lot is. So in the maps, we've just grayed out the actual tax lot. There's no buffer around the businesses. So we need to think about, you know, if that ends up in our place restrictions, if we have restrictions around businesses, we need to think of a different way to talk about that. or even add it as a manner restriction of just not blocking doorways. So I just wanted to call that out. And so those are just really for reference as you're having your group discussion to show where, and like I said, I'll be back there to help guide that. So I think we're on questions now about this portion.
Hold on, no questions yet, because everybody has a lot of questions right now, and that's good. You should have a lot of questions. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna split you into groups so that you all can discuss this, right? This is not, if you all just threw your questions at us right now, we would not have enough time. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna split folks into groups. We're gonna spend about 20 minutes discussing as a group. I want somebody to be identified as a scribe and somebody to report back, because we're going to have a report back to the larger group so that we can talk about that and we can lift up any of those questions that came from the group as a whole. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to split you all up. Rachel, if I can have you sit over here at this table, I'm going to split you two up, and I'm going to split you two up, and I'm going to split you two up, and I'm going to split you two up. If I can have you come to this table, Matt come to this table, Daniel come to this table here, Jessica this table, Kim here, Linda here, and Nancy here. So should have 3 tables. Yeah, that's good discussion. Cool. So what we're gonna be doing is talking about that. So I'm gonna put the slide back onto the map slide. Because all the manager's guidelines information is on the papers in front of you. There's a paper that's labeled manager's guidelines, so you can refer to that for that information. So identify a scribe, someone to report back to the larger group. And I'm going to put the slide back to the map slide. Now, like Mandy said, she's gonna be over here by the maps. David and Chad are gonna be available for questions for different groups if you have them as they come up to refer to things. You can ask me questions, I won't know the answers. And then we'll talk about next steps after that. So we got about 20 minutes. Go ahead and chat. Yes, so you should be talking about the manager's guidelines
I don't like.
and the maps. So start with manager guidelines, kind of the most important piece. Talk about that, questions you have, things you want lifted up, things you want removed, things you want added, right? All of this is still kind of in build mode. So yeah, discuss it, figure out what you think is important, what you think is not important, all that good stuff. Yeah. Manager guidelines first. The reason I'm have on the screen because it's readable live and we have it all. Yeah, so input on the manager. So I think that change right, all of that stuff. And I call them managers' guidelines. They're managers' administrative rules.
I mean, I can say what I don't like, that's what him already said. There's a lot of. I mean, it does like, you know, public right of way, it barely says that. What, where the are. Is manager. Administrative rules are for. The administrative to.
Should be like. So it's basically, these are the administrative rules that the manager creates, like he's the one that says. And it'd be for everybody to follow. If I'm understanding. For the place of manner. So the ordinance specifically mentions like time and other parts of it, but for place and manner, that's specifically in the administrative.
So it's meant for the general public too.
Yes, and obviously, like, there's a lot of stuff here. It's up to us as a city to make this very like clear. Because I'm like, yeah, figure out a way to make this a little bit more digestible because it's another way. So that comes to meeting. I don't even know.
We're not sure here.
So we need a. But so this is, again, the ordinance and this is whenever there's.
That's.
Does that make sense?
So, but yeah, we're not here.
It'll be publicly accessible, like people will get copies of it, but the FAQ, that'll be where it's attempting to clarify, simplify things. But so that's what we really want feedback on. Because like for me, who's read this, the ordinance, I would think the guidelines all these times. It's something that's clear to me. But somebody that hasn't read this many times, you just get the first eyes on it. And just be clear to them. Or for people with barriers that we like my team might be getting into. Like during, because that first month, that's really going to be a learning period for everybody, for us. Like, what are some of the barriers and obstacles that we have to recognize, and also learning for individuals can't be in those spaces. But so it will be handing FAQs out to them. We obviously we need to recognize some of the barriers they might have in interpreting some of that. So yeah, we want the FAQs to turn out. So kind of create a bunch of different groups that we can make it as clear as possible. Well, we know there might have to be multiple versions of FAQs for different audiences. Like we're going to need a Spanish one, obviously. So, but yeah, no, as much feedback as we can get, especially because that's where a lot of the info is going to be directed to as wide reaching. So,
I think it does, yeah, because the ordinance is law.
Yeah, it's a legal document. And anybody will be able to get their hands on it. It's scary, but it's like your question. It's an ordinance, legal document, these guidelines, still a legal document, but energy less. And then the FAQs say, let's take all this information from board, this the managers, guidelines. The administrative ones, and let's parse it down, make it very simple and short. A trifold might be too big, but then also how do we get the perfect amount of info to where it's as clear as possible and the most concise 1-2 page documents. It's tough. I like the trifold. I think it's yeah, that's finally edited by everybody that can look at it. So I saw you at City Council, Judy. Yeah, when you presented it. I watched it on because they talked about their camping later on. So I watched it.
Great, thank you, I appreciate it.
That makes sense.
I walked certain I can get.
Just a quick heads up, these are your documents, so feel free to mark them up as much as you want, write on them. They're yours.
Something that you want us to write down. I think we're gonna run out of time. Yes. So does anyone have feedback? Right now?
What about businesses like a?
It's not clear.
Even if it's a bit, it is on.
So we didn't look at.
I was saying, because like they were saying how, we can't. Run out of these, so we're not.
If at the end of the day, city council says that's what I do. But my job here is that I'm gonna fall myself over all day long. That's not gonna happen. Yeah. That's my goal here is to say.
Because you guys are.
Absolutely. It's under the person. And it's person. And police enforcement issue. Person. I know exactly what it is.
Well, you're trying
He has some feedback about maybe adding something in for
And that's what I'm saying.
When I was trying out possible, whatever, storage.
All right, we have a lot of information.
That would be.
It happens to be just the time. Yeah, so you had lots of. Not everyone's, you know, going hotel room and that was kind of. That's.
So here's your space, you can store your stuff and go back to
No, yeah, I used, I think just. Other consideration.
Shade. There's other. I was gonna say, it's 5 by 5 by 5. Like it's always been.
What's the time check?
About 10 minutes remaining, folks, about 10 minutes remaining.
That's what they like. They don't like.
I just don't know who all is writing this to have it here and say, look, what's this in? I'm like, well, I think my job is to
Concern about right.
raise the issue. But I can't let this speak. Because then people are like.
I don't know that.
The concern is. Not just ordinary, but it was like concerned about people camping and it's a distance.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of figure out exactly. Trying to find the charter.
They took it out. Maybe that's something. Yeah, that's why. It's a good one.
All of it.
Still, I think there's a. And isn't that still considered? It always. So you feel like it needs to be specified? I think it should be. I think it is. No, it says anyone under the age of 18. If you play any valuable, I wanted to be fair to full here. Oh, it does say second. I didn't finish writing it all. I mean, we're not being fair. You know what you're writing. Me. It dropped off.
They have an older sibling.
Yeah, I mean, if you walk and you might. Yeah.
But it's not.
You're right. You know. So. If I actually want to check the charter, and they get to the shot of stuff.
I mean, I've already. HMC.
The open flames, like obviously like recreational fires. Like we're burning of garbage, bonfire, it's just open flames, like not like the small cooking stove, camping stove. I mean, that's still. Flame, I feel like they should be able to cook it. On a paper.
Yeah. I use that.
All right, folks, can I have attention real quick?
Yes.
Hello. We don't need interpreters, we're just doing lunch things right now. So we decided to pivot a little bit. And because there's such good discussion happening right now, if you all wanted to just kind of have lunch here while you're chatting and continuing the discussion, that'd be great if you're all willing to do that. If not, then we could just take a break for an hour. But if you do that, lunch is available. It's over there. There are a few people that had dietary restrictions. I have no idea if they're here or not. The anti-mayo person is here. So go ahead and grab lunch. Again, continue these discussions, and we'll have this all going for about 45 minutes until. All right. Until about 12:30, we'll just keep these discussions going. Mandy did step out, so if you have questions about the map, hold on to those, and when she gets back, we'll talk about that. So it is officially lunchtime. Feel free to continue working and discussing because there's a lot of robust discussing. I'll explain the dots later.
Thank you.
You know, I was curious.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Oh, busy.
Good job.
The agricultural community came with a feedback from them. They acted very like my new questions, which is a question about the ordinance.
Yes.
They're gonna have a couple more June. Glad for it to be effective, but they're gonna be. They have to vote on it, but they're gonna read they didn't do that. They didn't do that. It would be. That would be. Not like.
When you get out of the.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
I'll be good.
Yeah,
Teams. Otherwise, I'll.
I highly doubt that.
Yeah, okay.
But I will let you know.
You have this. You have to have basically cameras to go. They'll be minutes. But she had 3 minutes. The one I went to get like Jim conversation about him like.
Yeah.
Then, down here.
All right, folks. We're gonna go ahead and get restarted. I think pretty much everyone is back at this point. I didn't do a head count or anything, so. All right, before we get started, I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, I want to give a big thank you to our interpreters, Sandra and Nan. It's a huge deal. Really are the voice of people that, you know, can't understand English and be here in this space for the Spanish speakers. So I really, really appreciate that. And while nobody in this space is using it, we are recording this and it'll be up on YouTube for those folks. So as a reminder, for our interpreters, please, please, please talk slowly. And hold the mic close to your mouth. So mic close to your mouth, talk slowly so that they can accurately interpret what is being said, because there's a lot of very specific things being said. And then this is mainly for the presenters. When you are done speaking and mics being passed around for questions or whatever, please mute your mic so we don't get that loud, ridiculous feedback. Okay. Now, so what we were just doing for lunch and prior to that was discussing the manager's administrative rules. And so the hope is that we can take an opportunity to have some questions about that your table may have. And then we could do a really short kind of input session on the place specifically. So we have these sticky posted pads up on the wall there, and each of them have one of the listed identified places that is in the manager's administrative rules. And so you were each given a set of little sticky dots. These are for restrictions, right? I know we try to use positive language, but unfortunately for this, we did not. And so if you put a green dot here, that would say that it is most important to me that we restrict camping near shelter providers, okay? If you put a blue dot here, you are saying, from my perspective, the community that I'm here representing would believe that this restricting camping near shelter providers is the most important, right? Or near schools, or near entry and exit freeways, right? Just a second.
Green or blue?
Green is for you. Blue is for the community that you represent. And it's up there. And then yellow is least important to you. So if I am, you know, saying that I don't care whether or not people camp near schools, right? I would put a yellow dot here. If I believe my community would agree with that as well, based on my perspective, right? We can only speak for ourselves, but we're just asking you to represent from your perspective, then you would put a red dot here, right? Those are up on the board. Please, if you have questions, let me know. Everybody gets 4 stickers, 1 of each color. Any questions about that piece? Cool. Now, you all had ample time to kind of have some discussion around all of this. And I'm sure there are questions from the tables and things you want to report back on. And so we're opening up this opportunity now for our different tables to speak up about questions they may have, things they want to report back on, comments about the manager's administrative rules. One more caveat. So place is up there on the wall. Mandy will be taking notes as we're talking about that. Okay, so manner is all just kind of general feedback, and we're going to be scribing that. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense. And I will turn. Oh, that's right. And then we have sticky pads if you have comments that you wanted to add onto any of those whiteboards about specific things. And so I'm going to just kind of leave those over here on the table. Those will stick to there. So if you have things that, you know, aren't necessarily getting addressed that you want to put up there, you can write it on there and put it up on the board. I'll spread these out on the different tables. Any questions?
When we're using the red one, saying what is least important to our community or most important to our community, what are we defining as our community? Are we defining that as the general public or like the people we work with?
Yes, so the people that you work with. So like, for example, Barry is here on behalf of the Black Advisory Business Council. And so he is representing business community as well as the specific Black Advisory Business Council. And so while he doesn't speak for them, he has a perspective in his participation in that group. And so, yeah, so everybody has that piece of story for them. Go ahead, Chad. Oh, I thought you had something to say. I was like, oh no, did I do something wrong? Okay. Any other questions about that?
Can you read those off?
Yes, I can read those off. So this is high-speed roads. This is over 45 miles per hour. Near shelter providers. These are all the things that are listed on the manager administrative rules in front of you. Near schools, near entry and exit to freeways, city parks, residential areas, business entrances, environmentally sensitive areas, city buildings, parking lots, and parking structures. And you'll have opportunity to kind of get up and walk over there and look at them. Hopefully your discussions at your table kind of prepared you to have conversations about this or to have input on this, but we'll also have time for questions and such right now.
I have a question. Based on the administrative rules, we focus on place, we're focusing on where people are prohibited from camping from within the city. Oh, my apologies. So are we saying from that, the sticky notes, are we placing what's important to, from most important, least important to enforce restrictions on my community and me? That I'm kind of confused on.
Yes, all of these are restrictions. So anything here, so if I put a green sticker here, I'm saying it is most important to me to restrict camping here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I think one thing we can add to maybe add some clarification is it's not clear that we're going to be able to impose all of these restrictions. So what we're trying to do is get feedback from everybody to say, what is the most important and least important from your perspective? If we do have to make changes to these and we can't use all these, you know, which ones would we sort of focus on potentially removing?
Thank you, Chad. Okay, now, before we jump into all of that, questions, feedback, table from each table. Who has thoughts that they want to share? You're all supposed to identify someone to report back. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. So just, I guess, more of a process question for you, Marcus. If because I have an obligation to push back on the change that would allow camping in or on parks property that's not developed. What is the best way for me to go about that? Do you know where this came from? Who should I be speaking to or telling my director to speak to about that issue?
So I guess the process that I would do if I was in your shoes on that, I would put at least the blue dot here on parks, right? At least a blue dot. Now, you may have a different personal opinion, and that's okay. And then if you had other things that you wanted to add, I would write it on one of those sticky notes and stick it onto that city parks pad.
Okay, but I mean, who should I have my director speak to though? This won't be where I'm going to be obnoxious. So who do we need to go to?
No, be obnoxious here. This is the place for it. This is the place for it.
I just mean, I don't want to take up all of our time diving into this one thing. I'm sure people have all kinds of opinions. I don't want to dominate.
And I won't allow you to take up all of the time.
So I will be happy to put the dots where I want the dots to go. But then, because Chad wasn't sure where that was, like, is that like from Robbie? Is that from council? Like, who wanted that change made?
Yeah, so all of this information is going to be taken from this team here. So myself, Chad, David, and Mandy, and Megan, and taken to council. So as with anything with the city or with anything, if you wanted to take it to the top, you are more than welcome to. Robbie has a phone. The city councilors have emails and phones, and Mandy has something to say because I'm probably saying something wrong.
Well, I just want to say, so I know we have some internal city folks here too. And so the manager's guidelines and the updated ordinance did go out to directors to give comments directly to me. So you can talk to your director and then they can provide comments. And I'm just kind of, I'm just gathering all those so that when we get back together to look at any changes that need to be made, we have all that feedback.
But with that in mind, the reason that we do this process is so it doesn't all stay behind closed doors, right? And so when you ask the question, you know, who do I talk to about, you talk to us. This is how we have this conversation, right? Because we don't want to be.
I just mean, I have an obligation to tell my director about it. So I'm just trying to figure out who he needs to talk to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just trying to do my job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Perfect. Any other process questions? Can we jump into questions content wise around place or manner?
Hello. Our first is why exclude all City of Hillsboro buildings and parking lots? It seems like the city's just able to wipe their hands and say everyone else has to deal with it, but the city doesn't have to have their part. So that was our first one. And do you want us to go just through all of them or do you want to?
Yeah, I think it'll be best for Manny. Manny's kind of doing double duty on notes and going to be responding as well. So yeah, go through all of them and she can respond.
And then the 500 feet of service providers was a question. I don't know if that's a hard set or if it could be lowered or I guess the reason behind it. I'll let you explain this last one.
So in the manager's administrative rule, and I believe it's section 2, it says that the manager temporarily permit camping. Oh, yeah, sorry, in an area prohibited by section A1 without amending these administrative rules upon a finding that granting such permission is necessary to protect the public interest, such as authorization shall not exceed 120 days. So my thought around this is that I understand that it's written this way, but how do we get to this? And could we possibly amend this to where if this decision is made, that it does consider community engagement, especially in our most vulnerable communities throughout the city of Hillsboro?
What section would that 120 days?
Under place.
Under place.
Section 2.
Section 2.
Section 2 under place.
Okay, was that it?
So I can.
Oh, go ahead, Chad.
Are we gonna go through each one?
No, I was checking to see if they were done.
So to the last point, the goal for that section was to create some flexibility in the process. So for example, we're saying no camping is allowed in any city parking lot. Let's say, for example, we determine that block 67 in downtown is a big parking lot right now, and that should be available for parking. So rather than, amending the administrative rules off the bat, we would have 120 days to try camping in the block 67 parking lot. And if it's working out, then we would formally amend the rules to create that exemption. So the basic idea is to create an additional level of flexibility within the administrative rules themselves without actually having to amend the administrative rules themselves just to see if something works and then go through the process of amending the administrative rules.
120 days is the standard.
If you have feedback that 120 days is too long or too short, let us know. It's not there's no magic number to that.
Wait, Chad, before you give that mic up, I want to have Mandy respond to the other two things as well. Can you restate what they were before you respond to them?
So the first points we're asking around place, why the reason behind city buildings and parking lots. And then 500-foot buffer around service providers. Both of those are similar to what we've seen in other jurisdictions. So just trying to align, I think, is one reason on both of those. For the service provider piece, also hearing feedback from other communities that it can be difficult to, as the operator of a service, say a shelter, if you have camping right outside your door, to both manage what's your service that's going on inside the building and camping that may be occurring, and kind of issues get conflated for neighbors. But certainly open to hearing like if there's different thoughts on that 500-foot, or we just chose that 500 to align with other jurisdictions in Washington County. And then in terms of city buildings, so we broke out on the maps city property that has facilities on it and city properties that does not have facilities on it. And the thinking being that most of our city facilities are surrounded by parking lots. When we've had camping around city facilities before, there's kind of this mix of tents in parking spaces and near where cars are moving. They're also active for community functions. Folks are going in and out. So again, open to feedback on the place. It's just that's what we've heard for city facilities and the parking lots surrounding them. Any other thoughts?
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
For the 120 days, under Oregon Fire Code, you cannot have a temporary structure in place for more than that period of time. So I'm assuming that's kind of blanketed for all of that.
Drop in knowledge, love it. Thank you. Okay. Anything else from this table? Thank you. Y'all, that was like the perfect situation. I appreciate you all. Okay.
Overachievers. Wait, did you get your question answered about engagement though?
Who knows what, EJ?
Just to make sure, because I have that question too now, Jeff. One example, what were you thinking of? I mean, I wasn't quite understanding.
Yeah, I don't want to be put on the spot in regards to that, but I'll answer this way. Is that I think there's areas, not just in Hillsboro, but throughout Washington County, that shelters have been cited where there is concerns insofar as where they're being set, especially in our most vulnerable communities. So that's what I'm concerned about. If this happens, again, as it's written, I understand from it is that somebody would be able to make that decision and not include community as a part of that process. And again, that's the issue I'm concerned about, because we already know there's issues in regards to that in our community locally. So again, this would be another issue where someone makes that decision and our community is left behind. So that's the concern I have. And not just for the Latino community, because there's other communities that will be impacted. And again, as I mentioned, because Jessica, you're a part of a group and I want to honor your space here. I'm not trying to be negative, but there are communities in Hillsboro that have been deeply impacted by these things. So that's more so my train of thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And I can speak a little bit about the community engagement aspect of that. We have a community engagement framework for the city of Hillsboro, and in the near future, just we haven't been able to implement it yet, just with our capacity. But hopefully by the fall, we'll be able to have the first cohort of engagers from around the city, all the different divisions and departments, being trained up on the community engagement process for things like this, and you know, less hands-on, more hands-on, right, and everything in between. With that in mind, there's also a plan I have in place with our IS department about having a internal and external facing document that will show where all the community engagement projects or processes are happening at any given moment, and what stage they are in the process. Now, doesn't exist yet. And I will do my best to try to get it done in the next year, but that process takes time.
And yes, I do appreciate the efforts on the behalf of the city of Hillsboro. But with that said, because this will, and I understand, will need to happen by July 1st. So in the interim, with that in mind, what can we do to make sure that, again, we have our most vulnerable communities at the forefront when we're talking about these issues?
Thank you. Yes, so later on in the presentation, we'll be talking about getting that information and education out into our communities. Okay. This table. Who's reporting? Rebecca.
All right, so I'm just gonna read closer. Okay. Dislike was something that was brought up earlier in discussion, and it just really jumps out as soon as you start looking at this, is that it's just all the cans. And it doesn't really cover the cans. And there was a question about businesses that are for lease, where there's like a vacant lot or a business that's shut down and has empty space, and what it would look like for people to be camping in that space while it's unused or in front of it. Yeah. And also there was a question about appropriate storage options for people's belongings. And then there was, okay, and then there's a section where it's talking about the proximity to schools, and then it specifically says that that does not include daycares and preschools. So that was surprising. Someone brought up that it used to be in, that it specifically, it has been excluded, that it was included at one point and now is excluded. So there was a question about that. And then the last thing that we got on here was about the open flames, because we want to know if it includes or excludes like a small camping stove as a means of cooking for our folks that need to cook dinner while they're homeless. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, just checking up. So we didn't specify in the current active business versus not active. So that's something that we can consider. That might be difficult to map as that's going to change. That would be my only thought off the top of my head. And just making a map that could reflect that. Let's see, proximity to schools, why it says K through 12 specifically. So our thinking there is, one, we need to be objectively reasonable. Our locations as they are already probably too expansive. When you add daycares and daycares or preschool, it's essentially all over the city, and the buffers are very restrictive. The other thought there is that those facilities would have pickup drop off. You're not going to have kids that are transiting or walking. They will be straight to the door and picked up straight from the door. So our thought there is it doesn't have the same like transiting concerns that we've heard for K through 12. And then also just mapping wise, we could only, when we did talk about daycares, we could only look at licensed daycares. Unlicensed daycares that are in homes, like there's just simply no way to map those. So that's just kind of another layer. The open flames, we didn't specify like a gas, like a buddy stove or anything like that. I'm curious, you know, fire's opinion on that would probably have a better thought about that. We didn't exclude those from this. We just said no open flame. I know other jurisdictions have specifically called out like no gas cooking or heating. We didn't do that.
Essentially that it would be considered. I think that a cooking stove essentially would be considered an open flame, but it's contained and it does use the gas. Like you said, you did not exclude gas specifically, but if there was maybe more inclusive language to include that there is exception for camping stove.
He's so happy.
You don't have to, I just. So this one did not come from fire, just so everybody's aware. However, other cities as well as ours have experienced issues with open flames. And I guess one of the problems is it doesn't necessarily always affect just that person. Generally, especially if they're campsite or camps close together, we see multiple affected from it, as well as property. Just recently in a Hillsboro park, we had to fall multiple trees as a result. So I understand the intent from that. However, it also doesn't solve kind of the issue of sometimes people need to heat things or heat themselves.
Thank you. Does this table feel like all the questions were adequately addressed? Okay. Totally fine.
I would just recommend looking into licensure requirements because something in the back of my head is telling me that if we didn't have a restriction, there would be an issue with taking kids outside in terms of licensure. And so I would just encourage to look into that. I could be wrong, but I think that there are requirements.
Thank you. Mandy, do you have any follow-up from that or David? Okay, this table here, got a mic right behind you.
Okay, the first thing brought up was there's hope that the day's facilities would have some sort of funding and support to mirror the camping time restriction so that they're able to open. Sounds like there may have been some movement on that one already. The second thing that was discussed was there was hope that if there are sanctioned campsites, there would be some sort of facilitator or manager there to make sure that they're run properly. The third thing we talked about was the possibility, I think it was section 1D, that there could be no camping within 500 feet of school zones. And if there's any adjustment or movability on that, because from what I'm hearing, there is some proper land that could be used for that, as well as porta potties that are at some of these school zones. One wish that we had was that there was still no camping on public safety or emergency response locations. And then the last one was that after discussing kind of like the property spaces available in county, that there is some like parcels of land that is county property, but kind of seeing where they are as far as collaborating and possibly kind of donating those pieces of land for in the city limits to be used for camps.
Okay, thank you. I'll give Mandy a second to finish writing. Ready?
Sure. And I think the only question I heard in there was movability of the feet around schools. I think that, yeah, that's why we are getting feedback on this. So the sticky portion, you can put a comment like, I wish this was 250 feet. So those are what you can put up on there. And then, because it sounded like you wanted less of a buffer, not more. Okay. So yeah, I think those are the feedback you can put on the sticky so we can kind of see how many folks thinking that way, if it's one person, if it's multiple folks.
Also add, we will be taking these large sheets as well. So please, if you want it in multiple places, please put it in multiple places, but we'll be gathering all of it. Okay.
In regards to the schools, so does that mean, what would be if I live across the street from a school, so 30 feet away, can I apply to have homeless people park in my parking lot, in my driveway?
Yeah, so these time, place, and manner restrictions only apply to camping on city property or in the public right of way. So when you're talking about the private property camping, it's completely separate.
Okay. Does that table feel like you've got everything addressed that you wanted to get addressed or taken down? Okay. Y'all, that was so smooth. Wow. Now we're about to create chaos because I want everybody to be getting up out of their seats and putting dots on the walls. All right. So just a reminder, and Catherine, I'll get you some dots as well, is we are putting sticky notes on the wall. This is only regarding place. And these are restrictions. So you'll have 2 positive, 2 negative, 2 saying. Siri, I'm sorry. Yep, Siri clearly knows how to read a room. So if I want this to be restricted for people to camp by business entrances, I would put a green or blue or both dots here. If I do not care about business entrances, I would put a yellow or red dot here. Please let me know if there are questions about that. Now, you will have, like I said, 2 affirming dots and 2 negative dots. Your opinion may be different than the opinion you're here to represent, and that's okay. And so my guess is that most of the green and blues are going to be together. Right? But it doesn't have to be. You are individuals, you are important, your voice matters, you're here for a reason, but you're also here to represent your organization or your community. And so that's the instructions. Hopefully with the discussion we had here and discussions you had at your table, we can do this smoothly. And like Chad said, this is so that we can make sure that we are accurately reflecting at least the folks here in this space when it comes time to make some decisions so we can be objectively reasonable. So go ahead and go. Sessions from Hillsboro, right? Getting a lot of what to there. You also need to. Yeah.
Why did this backward?
They're not.
Oh, I guess I should have been backwards.
And I. That sounds what I thought.
So you.
That's my younger. Yeah. Yes.
Anybody would like to sing some intermission music? You're more than welcome to, Kim.
No,
Stevie Wonder, can I make a Stevie Wonder?
Not important. I mean, I figure.
I know.
You gotta add CPR. Yeah. Yes. Look at that later. I can throw it on my desk.
Why don't you do Not so much.
Give me back.
Just reflecting.
It's a screen, right? Earlier when I asked you what we did.
Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, and Marcus will probably like, rephrase this better than I am. But the idea is that we're getting this. At the end of the day, some of these council, some are gonna be made by the city. We're gonna share all those fees. So, they could say, I don't care what everyone else thinks. We think these are. Yeah. Yeah.
And have you guys
Well, I think, Mandy can ask Mandy, but my understanding is that's where this came from. That was sort of their intent to happen. Because I think there's a.
All right, folks, we've got a last call for stickies. About another minute remaining for stickies.
I understand that.
But yes and no.
Yeah. So, yeah, that does.
I'm screaming at us.
But yeah, but this, I mean, the point is that, like I said, I think. This is just, the city hasn't invested in the street. This is, so just because that's what people are saying, doesn't mean.
Right.
And I'm gonna say just something that.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm gonna bring that up as well. It's really important.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, hopefully by this point, everyone has had a chance to get their sticky up. We're gonna go ahead and get Reese. I now only have one here.
I didn't know that. I didn't my ears. Not really.
I'm now scared to be at the front of the room. All right, so let's bring it back. Hopefully that ridiculously loud sound was a reminder for anybody in Cornelius to come over here. All right, so I did want to bring up one thing that was brought up to me during this session, and it's a really good point, and I wanted to acknowledge. We've gathered a lot of qualitative data throughout these sessions and using our Engage Hillsboro platform. And so we wanted to take some opportunities to also get some quantitative data. So we did that on Engage Hillsboro. We're also doing that here. Now, we need to acknowledge that this data is skewed, right? If you look around the room, there was a lot of city staff here, and that needs to be acknowledged. When we created the invites for this, we invited 40 different stakeholders. You see how many we have here, and it's okay. Like, I'm not upset at anybody or anything along those lines. It's just, I just have to acknowledge that had every represented organization and community and folk been here, there would be a little bit less skew to that data in terms of city staff or government staff, I should say. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that out loud, just in honor of transparency. So the next thing I wanted to say, so this information that we are gathering today is going to be going to the administrative rules update. So our draft writer is going to be working on that, and we're going to be presenting at council on June 6th for this. The ordinance is going to be there for the first reading and then the second reading in the next June meeting, which I don't remember the date. This is going to be kind of the first presentation of the manager's administrative rules. So just want to let you know how this information is going to be utilized and all that. We already had lunch. Okay, so next we're going to talk about community education and ongoing feedback. This is, it's kind of worded weird, but it's really about how we can best inform our communities about the information that we're sharing, learning, developing here today and over the last few months. And so I will be turning it over to Megan from our communications team. Don't get too close to that speaker. It's very scary. It's been that one, but I don't trust that one either.
Okay, hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Megan Ita. I'm a communications specialist with the city of Hillsboro. And today we're looking for feedback on our outreach and communications when the new camping rules are implemented. So all the materials that you're seeing there, we're talking about for creation and distribution on or around July 1 when this all goes into place. Since March, we have been keeping the community up to date on this entire engagement process as much as we can through email newsletters, through the Engage Hillsboro platform, the city website, social media, print newsletters, all of our usual channels. But these are the materials that we are looking ahead to create as we educate them on what is in place once the rules are in place. So the first material would be a fact sheet, which is going to be kind of more of an overview. We're thinking a color trifold brochure, camping rules FAQ, which would be a PDF document and likely stay mostly in digital format. A printed flyer that we could display at buildings, recreation centers. If community partners wanted to display it just for informational purposes, that could be an option for them too. The camping rules webpage is probably going to be the meat and the details of everything. So people who are really interested and want to dig into the details of the ins and outs of the new rules can find everything on the webpage, including the manager's administrative guidelines and the ordinance itself and all that good stuff. Private camping will be new to the community. So we were thinking about a separate fact sheet for that. Printing a map for Hillsboro Police Department and other service providers to help them identify kind of where people can and cannot camp. And of course, updating our existing Engage Hillsboro project webpage and the Spanish version on Connectate. Hopefully you visited at least one of those by now. Okay, we have a lot of city distribution channels that we use to get the word out to the community as a whole. We'll definitely be in contact and collaborating with our partners and direct service providers. We'll email them the materials that we create. We can provide print copies as well. Our City Views print newsletter gets mailed to all addresses in Hillsboro, and that will go out right around the beginning of July. So we'll definitely have an update there. We have a homelessness email newsletter that has 1,600 subscribers, a Spanish email newsletter, Creciendo Juntos. Our website, of course, happening in Hillsboro is the citywide email newsletter, social media, those flyers at city facilities that I mentioned, and then maybe face-to-face as well at community events. We can hand out the brochure, we can answer questions. And of course, the police department's crisis intervention team that's working with people on the day-to-day basis will certainly be another way to get the word out. So we're going to do a deeper dive on our draft of the camping rules fact sheet, which is the color trifold brochure. Right now you have it in black and white. It's the one with that gray area on the right side where there's a comment. For this, we're thinking of having two separate versions, one in English, one in Spanish. The goal of this document is to provide a basic overview of the camping rules. It will definitely direct to our webpage for all of the details. We want it to be easy to carry and distribute because we're envisioning Hillsboro Police Department carrying this, maybe other outreach workers and service providers carrying this with them as they explain to folks, whether they be people who are living unsheltered or other people who are asking questions. So the audiences are both people experiencing homelessness, but also service providers, business owners, and community members as a whole. So we're hoping to answer kind of all of those needs in one nice free fact sheet. We'll distribute this through a lot of the channels I mentioned before. And I'm going to cover one more document, and then you'll have some time to discuss and give us feedback. The other document that we have drafted is a first draft of the FAQ. This is meant to be a digital PDF packet. It'll be available on our website. We can also email it out to service providers and via our email newsletters. Rather than the city printing and distributing this, because it would take a lot to try to mail this to everyone, the goal would kind of be for people to come and print it themselves from the website if they'd like. We may also distribute it internally to staff that work answering the phones or interface with the public a lot so they can answer those questions when they get them in real time. So that's the FAQ. What did I miss? Okay, back to Marcus.
All right, so as Megan just talked about, we do have some of those FAQs and fact sheets on your desk or on your tables. And so we'd like to take an opportunity for you to look at those, give us any feedback, thoughts, processes, questions, things that you think should be added to that in your small groups again. And we'll do that for about 20 minutes and do it the same way, just have a little bit of a report out.
I did miss one more thing I wanted to mention. So the fact sheet that's meant to be a trifold, there's a lot of text there for a trifold already. So as you're looking at that, please feel free to tell us any additions that you think are necessary, but also think about what could maybe be cut so that we can fit that into a nice handout for folks to carry. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we'll get started back into our discussion at about 1:50. We're here for questions if you need us.
Even try to have rather than just say really for ease of Got it.
Yeah, maybe that's that.
There's some legality with them telling people where they can. But I think if they had the map that showed the excluded, then they can see where, they can see where it's. My thought was, I don't know, I know as the housing case manager, we don't know this.
Having about. They have.
Right. Such a. I'm seriously.
Specifically say.
I mean, they ended up you. Or in this, in your case, they made it pretty specific, but on the.
I walk station. Sidewalks. Struggling sidewalks. For the distances, I said. Basis me. It's not. Why does it verify that?
And I is so frustrating because when I was working for an organization that had workers, like you can walk in there and there are empty beds. And so I understand though, like if you come up with a designated for specific reasons, but it's just frustrating. And especially if someone walk in and wants to like. Then empty beds that are being reserved for specific for maybe not getting used to that. But yeah, I mean, that's not. That's just the whole frustration. Yeah, it maybe I people, but also. Yeah. That's the question. Obviously, NSA, use NSA. That's the story. Myers. Okay. I'm not used to where. Well, I think that So the city parks still have like. You know, second, and it's still on top of the barbecue. Yes. So, but. So like. content. They give out breakfast and lunch. I think anybody can give it, right?
Getting rid of a lot of like. Probably not like. A lot of people that have cars that. Or shelters.
Oh.
Maybe 7.
7 PM to 7 AM.
Round parties, park. Here, that's my question.
About 5 minutes remaining. About 5 minutes remaining. About 5 minutes remaining.
Always, you know.
Yeah. Shelter or anything or something. I mean, I think that's, it's like. Another topic. I don't think that's like private. I don't think you know, they're talking about, oh, you want trains, you know, all of my. They have like that.
But I can complain about that. All right, folks. How we feeling? We need to have some discussion. Cool. All right. So as we did previously, and it went really amazingly well. I'm hoping it does again. I'm gonna start with this table this time is have somebody report out back to us about things that you're wanting to see in the FAQs, things you're wanting to see removed, added to the fact sheets, any and all of that information. And Mandy, are you taking notes on this as well? Mandy, are you taking notes on this as well? Okay. And Manny will be taking notes and Megan will be answering questions, and any of us that needs to answer questions at certain times, we will. And go.
Okay, we have 3 questions, so maybe easiest to most difficult. Will these handouts replace the business toolkit handouts? Because it seems like there's overlap, and if not, can they be formatted to be the same size? So we can display them together. And then we like there to be information and hear more about the acknowledgement that we've all had to make is that this does not end homelessness. Adding more housing, adding more shelters is what's gonna end.
Yeah.
Sorry, wrong.
That it stems from all of our dots over there, that because the question was, why doesn't the county or why doesn't the city just add more shelters? Adding more shelters is not going to end homelessness. And so just making sure that that's kind of a clear understanding. And that if we have the ability to allow friends to be within 500 feet, that makes it even more difficult to do shelter siting, you know, in this work. So being just cognizant of that, I don't know how that's worded, Mandy, or even if it needs to be specifically called out in that way, but just an understanding that this ordinance isn't going to end homelessness. Shelters don't end homelessness.
That it's a systematic issue in our society that it'll take a lot more to change. And then we really struggled over the negative side of a code of you can't do this and you can't do that. And that people that I give example, like people, when you go to a park, people that care, stop and read the signs. And that's why we don't have no signs anymore. We now have, you can do this and you can do this signs. But then we also talked about like the city wasn't have liability for sending people to certain places. And that something happens in that place and then they get in trouble for it. But if there's a way to change the perspective of leading with the where people can go and then adding in those exclusions secondary if they're still necessary to be in there, but then having like a QR code back to the code. Is that right?
Thank you. Any responses to that, Mandy, Megan?
So just a clarifying point to what Kim was saying. So are you talking about the FAQ that says, why doesn't the city just create enough shelter beds? That one? Okay. So I made the note there. And then on the negative versus positive, curious if there is any thoughts, the materials we create seems like they would be almost immediately out of date if we said, here's the exact streets you can be on from this street to this street. I mean, we're going to have to update the maps quite frequently. Like I'm already talking about, like there's a shelter that's under construction. So as when they open, you know, that bumper would come up, or, you know, as different places move or change. So I've trying to struggle with like a way to do that. And I'm open to any thoughts too.
I just wanted to comment that unfortunately, or fortunately, you know, most laws work in the way that it says what you can't do. So for example, smoking in the city of Hillsboro, there are certain places where you can't smoke, but you won't find anything that says where you can smoke. I think the issue is just that there are so many restrictions on this one that it makes it really challenging to even know where you can. And so I think that's probably the bigger question of how is that addressed to where people really do have a good understanding, both the providers and the individuals, of where they truly are allowed to go. And I don't know that there's an easy answer to that.
Yeah, I think the answer right now is the final map and just making sure our service providers understand the map and can interpret that for folks and our police teams. Also, one of the feedback points we're hoping to get besides these two materials is on the maps themselves. So there's different ways that they could look. If you have specific ideas about how to make them more simple to understand, we've been in ongoing meetings with our GIS folks to try to get there. And so I'm open to feedback on how to make those really clear too.
I think with you talking about the changes that are going to happen, I mean, we know that QR codes are the one thing that COVID saved, like people are using them all the time. So having the managers, policy, administrative rules and those things like, and the code and the map in particular, like, you know, a link to the current map, and you're just keep making sure that that's up to date because people will understand. And even when they go to that map saying like when the last update was made, so people know like, well, if I looked at this 6 months ago, it's been changed since then, I think would be really helpful, because it's like you said, as soon as you put that out, it's going to be complaints and changes.
Thank you.
Great suggestion, but we also need to remember that there are people that have literacy issues and also issues in regards to accessing technology. So making sure that that is also a part of that process.
I really appreciate that feedback. The plan is definitely to have a QR code and or just direct to the webpage where all of those resources will live, one of the two, whichever, but maybe both. In terms of like the negative framing, I struggle with that as Mandy and I were putting our heads together to create this. But I don't have an easy way to say you can camp here, 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 and here. So it made it very difficult for us as we were trying to create it. I think it's going to be difficult too to distribute maps that are very complex. So I think that's kind of what we're working on here is how to make this understandable for everyone. Also, just a caveat, we can always collect more feedback and update brochures. And if materials aren't working and we're getting feedback that people aren't understanding, we can always make updates in the future too. But thanks everyone.
Will this be in English and Spanish?
Yes, the trifold fact sheet is intended to be two copies, two versions, so a Spanish version and an English version. It's way too much to fit on one trifold.
Just in regards to that, it's helpful if the English one in particular has also the link to the Spanish website too. So if I'm trying to talk to someone who doesn't speak Spanish, I can at least guide them to the online, that doesn't speak English, I can at least guide them. Does that make sense? So, and I don't know if vice versa, if that's helpful, especially when there's teenagers talking to their parents and some are fluent.
Absolutely, we can make mention that Spanish information. Sorry, absolutely, we could make mention that Spanish information is available online. Typically, we link web information together. So if you're on the English webpage, you can go over to the Spanish webpage, etc. But I think mentioning that in the brochure specifically is a great idea.
The other thing I wanted to add is we're talking about, we talk a lot about English and Spanish because that makes sense for our community, specifically demographically, but any materials that we have as City of Hillsboro can be requested and given in other languages as well. So just wanted to say that. Okay, does this table feel like we got an adequate response? Okay, cool. We'll move on to this table. Who is going to be?
All the color coding.
All right. The first thing that we suggested was that the back of the trifold should be the map. So that it can be used as a map when you hand it out, particularly to the folks that are going to be most likely to use it. And it should also have guides or colors or icons or something that are indicating this places that the trifold talks about not being allowed. So it's a direct orientation between those two things so that the trifold can be actionable. The second thing was there was a wish to remove the moratorium on camping at shelter properties, as that was identified as the most safe space to set up camps and the preferred place to set up camps in the community. We had a discussion about vehicle camping and tent camping, as there was a implication that all these rules were just for tent camping and that vehicle camping had their own rules. And in the trifold, it pointed to a different resource. So our suggestion was to make all of the rules apply to both tent camping and vehicle camping and call that out specifically. That may be the case, but from here, it looks like there's two different sets of rules. And so we suggested that the title should be tent and vehicle camping rules and remove a specific section on vehicle camping. The other one was that this needs to be written at a 5th grade reading level, which is the national average for reading levels. We also need to have it observed for accessibility and understanding by lots of different understanding levels, particularly folks that are neurodivergent, and also have this pamphlet reviewed by houseless folks as a consumer review panel before it goes to print. We wanted to make sure that all of the terms were defined in common language, such as public rights of way, natural resource areas, et cetera. Some of the questions that came up were, what is a public right of way? Is it a public street? Is it a sidewalk? And then what's the difference between obstructing a sidewalk and camping on a public right of way, et cetera? So just make that really plain and really clear. Putting distances in common terms, such as 10 sidewalk squares or 1 football field or 2 city parks, because none of us are walking around with tape measures. And if we are, we're not using it for that purpose. How will people know if shelter beds are available or not? That seems to invite argument between houseless folks and officers that are trying to enforce this, as that is a moving target all the time. I don't have an answer, but that's the question. And particularly if an individual is saying there's not shelter beds available for me, we're very clear that that's a subjective experience. And so how can we make an objective determination on that statement? If we can't, then maybe we should remove it. Then I think that's everything. Did anybody else have any? No? Okay.
Gotta wait for it to turn green.
This is a bad microphone. So I'm going to address the vehicle camping and tent camping. So there are some areas where those do conflict, and the challenging part with the vehicle camping is vehicles also have to comply with the vehicle code and parking code also. There's multiple different codes throughout the city where vehicles can and can't park, restrictions with camping. A little higher up. I'm worried about that speaker. It's gonna squelch in just a second, I know. But we can try to clarify that as much as possible, but balancing it with the conflictions with the parking code is really tough.
Thank you for clarifying that. Then our suggestion would be that there's 1 pamphlet for tent camping and 1 pamphlet for vehicle camping. Having the section about vehicle camping that refers to something else that you would have to go dig for is not helpful.
It's great feedback. And then for available shelter, yeah, that's something that we talk about pretty consistently. And I've been trying to work with, say, Open Door, who run both shelter sites, of trying to determine, is there available shelter? That's going to be an ongoing problem that we're trying to determine the best way to communicate that. And you're absolutely right. How can we objectively determine if a shelter would be feasible for a specific person? And right now, there's not adequate shelter space. So that's easy. I think all of us can agree with the population of homeless individuals in our city. We just don't have adequate shelter space. But say hypothetically in the future, if there is, how to approach an objective manner, that'll be a much broader discussion.
Just a quick question, Dave, about the knowing if the shelter has beds. Are you on like a text alert with the different shelters that would say we have 2 beds up or we're full tonight? Or is that how they communicate with you?
Yeah, we don't have a text alert, but we do have different points of contact at both Safe Rest and now Salvation Army, where we can reach out directly to them, or there's a number for the shelter to where we can call and ask them. They do have a number of e-beds set aside, but those generally open up at 4 p.m. They do set aside some law enforcement beds also. So if somebody was released or in a set of emergency circumstances where we need to get them a shelter for that evening, we're able to do that. But yeah, I'm sure we can over time develop a more streamlined way to determine how many available beds there are.
Okay. Any other notes, responses, Megan, Mandy? Okay. Does this table feel like we're adequately represented and responded to? Cool. Perfect. All right. This table. Who wants to speak? And I wonder if our interpreters are singing. happening?
It's on now.
What's happening?
So Linda was asking, we had a discussion about if this pamphlet is to be given to people who are living unsheltered or experiencing homelessness. It needs to really be a resource for them to find what they need in the moment. My plan was to have on the back portion of it, the Community Connect phone number. There was discussion about a smaller card, and there are Community Connect resource cards that a lot of us have access to and do hand out. Linda was asking who creates and provides those, and I wasn't sure, but I assume Washington County or Community Action.
Washington County.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I was just thinking of, persons visiting the library to give them dignity and privacy to make these cards available so they don't have to ask a staff member, so that would be nice. So this is the first time I've heard those cards available, so that's wonderful. And that was basically about it. The brochure, as lovely as it is, the target audience seems to be people that are not experiencing houselessness or are in crisis. It's more like, these are the nuts. This is not what you can do, but here's some numbers you can call. For a lot of folks, some of them don't have phones, so they come and resource and use the phone and help, ask for help. So it'd be nice if they could just, I think for the most part, most of them know where they're welcome. They just need something to get them through and just to provide dignity and easy access to information. Again, the brochure is great. It's great for me as a person working in a public space where, sometimes my customers are experiencing or in crisis. This is great for me, but for the person who's actually going through it, it might not be such a great tool. And then also, green light.
So for everybody's just knowledge, the little button under the switch is a mute button. So please use that and you will have to deal with the red light.
It's that today too.
So I was just curious for the crisis team, what kind of data do you collect through however you do fiscal year or calendar year to determine what are most frequently used or crisis situations to come up with? Because I think that input would be really beneficial to some of the information they're trying to create or put in here in this document.
Could you be, sorry to have you hold on the microphone a little bit more. What kind of data specifically? Like, that's actually an ongoing conversation of what kind of data do we want to maintain? Can we maintain, like at one point we were trying to keep track of the number of camps that we post have to be removed. But then what data are we even able to maintain? Like, we don't want to keep track of people's names, so we don't do that. But and then other resource that we provide. But I know that MHRT, the mental health response team, they collect a lot of data to calls for service they respond to. There's other different opportunities to collect data that we're looking into with WACA, our dispatch of different call types that we can create specifically for our team. I have a meeting scheduled later in June to have specific calls that are directly related to this ordinance. So after a year, we'll have some sort of data, because right now I have no idea how many camps do we respond to, how many people in crisis that we respond to, because there are little check boxes for that, but it's so subjective that there's no way to extrapolate any reliable data from that.
So I just had I was just looking right now, but it looks like it seems like we're pretty set on 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I understand there's a lot of reasons surrounding that, but I was just thinking, has it been considered at all if people are farther out and away from, anybody and everything or whatever, and they're in the sidewalks, but still within limits or whatnot? Is there any talk, has there been any talk about extending that time a little bit in certain areas or in zones? Because it could be pretty hard for some people sometimes that early.
From my understanding, those are the kind of things that can be addressing kind of exclusions from the manager's administrative rules. But is that accurate or am I making that up? Oh, that's right. Time is in the ordinance. Okay. Yeah. So so the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. that is in the ordinance. It is what it is.
So I have all you lovely folks in this room. Linda sparked an idea and I wanted to run it by you. I know there's a lot of service providers here. Would a map of day centers be helpful as a resource to be giving people who are camping and kind of being asked to then camp maybe somewhere else in lieu of a map of where you can camp, which might be really hard to create? Would a map to find day centers and resources there? Is that a better resource than Community Connect when you're waiting to get a call back, or 211 where you're on hold, or maybe you don't have a phone, et cetera?
I'll just go back to putting it all on this map and having it on the trifold and the Community Connect website. There's several websites that you guys have under resources. But if you also have that on that map, that gives a can sense.
Thank you.
So I have a question in regards to whether or not information has been provided for the frequently asked questions. The area where it says, how will litter, garbage, and debris be managed? So I'm very aware that there's current concerns in the section of Hillsboro, Calle 10, where there's business owners that have taken on a significant amount of cost to get rid of trash, debris that has been there from people that have left it there. So it doesn't look like there's much support for that in this space. Will there be something that the city of Hillsboro potentially implements? Well, I know that there's people that are doing some of that, but there's businesses that have been told that because it's private property, they have to take care of it themselves. So again, as we open this up to where we're giving a radius for this area, I can only assume that this is going to cause more issues in regards to this ongoing issue in this community.
I guess the short answer is I'm not aware of any for private. We have our outdoor cleanup teams, which clean public, and kind of the thought with those teams, they're already assigned to hotspot areas throughout the community. 10th Avenue and Shoe Park is one of them that gets serviced. But the thought is when we figure out where camping can occur, that we can adjust the areas where those teams are going based on the locations where camping can occur, so that we make sure we have more debris coverage in the areas where it ends up where camping can occur. But that doesn't get to your deeper point of the private property piece, because that funding for that team is for public property. So I'm not aware. There may be others. I don't know, EJ, if you know of others, but we've worked a little bit with Solve, and we've connected them to a couple of business owners with the additional funding they have right now. So I know that's come up a couple times when you've worked with businesses to work with Solve. And so we refer people to them, but as a widespread resource, I don't know.
We have funding, and we've been trying to do it on Cal Ideas as we have just until Shoe Park. But that's ARPA funding and it's only 1 more year. So there's not a long-term solution. We made it clear, not in our contract with Mandy, but when our contract with economic development for that cleanup with ARPA, that we are doing private properties and we're going in and removing graffiti and things besides homelessness too. But when businesses call, we're cleaning up lots of needles and people that are taking over garbage enclosures and stuff. But again, that expires funding in 1 year. So there's no long-term solution for that.
And then on that point, to speak of the accountability aspect of it, I can't speak to cleanup, but if my team determines somebody, it's an appropriate action for them to be held accountable, whether it's through citation or an arrest for offensive littering, then we're the folks that need to be reached out to in regards to that. If we identify somebody that's littering, and again, the appropriate action is citation or arrest, and we've done that in the past.
Thank you.
This is just an area of concern, and we know that it has been for some time. And if the city, again, it's just one more thing for this community, you have to, it's layers, right? And I understand that. But we need to be very thoughtful on how we put this out, especially in our, again, most vulnerable communities. Because if there's nothing in place, we're gonna hear a lot of complaints from this community. And I think it would behoove us to make sure that we put something in place where, yes, you can potentially create a grant to the city of Hillsboro where they'll support you paying for the removal of certain things or creating a fund. But it's important. So I think it should be at the forefront of the work that we're doing, especially again, along Galletas.
So a couple of things to say to that. Again, just a reminder that the ordinance itself and the manager's administrative rules are not going to solve all these issues around houselessness. We'll also add that there is a big community engagement project coming up, process specifically coming up around Calle Diaz. And the RFP for that is going live hopefully within the next month. And so that is where we can definitely take in some of that specific community voice on that specific issue in that specific area, right? Now, this is a place to do it as well. And so I'm appreciative that you're doing it here. And it's kind of one of those things where we have to, as with anything, continue to voice our concerns as a community about X, Y, and Z in multiple different fronts. And so we're trying to create opportunities for that to happen. And it's a slow moving ship.
And kind of in regards to that, because for those of you that weren't here when it happened, the hotel on 10th Avenue being turned into a homeless shelter without any engagement of the community was obviously a concern. But I mean, from what I understand, the city isn't getting any Metro grants to address homelessness. I mean, Metro specific funding out of that giant bond measure, right? Right, that goes to the county. And the Metro bond, yeah, going to the county, right? That's where a lot of our providers are getting their funding. How can we, as citizens of Hillsboro and representatives of Hillsboro citizens, how do we go and say to the county, these are burdens on our small business owners, on our residents, that we're working with compassion, trying to find ways to help the homeless, but how do we get more services? How do we advocate at the county level or the Metro level that this isn't something that can end and there needs to be more funding? And I know that people are really eager to come and testify to city council, but no one goes to the commissioners. No one, I mean, they're not hitting them up, and they're the ones that are really held responsible. I know, like, as a municipal partner, you're not going to just throw them under the bus, but at the same time, like, making sure it's like, maybe clarifying if you want more financial support for programming that supports our homeless community and helps address some of the issues, we have to get the county and Metro and the state to get that funding. It's not coming from the money that we already have services being provided above and beyond what was intentioned along this whole time of our city taxes.
So I work at Project Homeless Connect, so I'm allowed to talk because I don't work for the city or the county. So funding is always going to be the thing, right? We can all agree. Funding is always going to be the thing. And I don't even know if there's an amount of money that we could put on ending homelessness or even poverty. That would be such a huge amount that none of our brains could get there. The Metro Bond Supporting Housing Services funding is very specific to housing, and the work that we have done over the last truly 18 months, even though it's been about 2 years that the funding's been coming in, has been life-changing for our friends, life-changing. I showed a picture to David and Matt earlier, and they were both like, oh my gosh, how did he get into housing? Like this moment of, we made change for someone that 6 months ago, we all would have sat around and been like, probably not. And so the funds are being used well. They're absolutely making change in people's lives. it's, you know, when it comes to this Metro Supportive Housing Services funding, it's going to be, can we reduce the visualization of homelessness so that the broader community can say, oh yeah, I definitely saw a change, because they don't care that Project Homeless Connect has housed 94 people. They want to see people off the streets, off the sidewalks, in their, you know, NIMBY coming into play. So I think it's a fine line. You know, I will always advocate for more funding where I think it's appropriate. And it's always with the recognition that the funding that we do have is good work is being done with it. I don't think there's a misuse of funds happening. And particularly when it comes to Metro Supportive Housing Services, the community did speak. They did speak up. They checked yes, which was awesome. And so now we're in this place where we're actually doing really good work. And so I think it's particularly around this ordinance, it's just the education and awareness around it, making sure that, you know, community at large understands what we're saying and what these words mean, that our friends that are going to be affected by this understand what these words mean, that law enforcement understands what these words mean. There's a real education piece to it that we all need to be engaging in some way. If it's at our works or at our networks at home, you know, our neighbors and stuff, so that they have a better understanding. Please go home and tell your neighbor that the Metro funding is working, good work is being done. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that that's actually happening. So there's never going to be enough funding. We can keep asking and asking. And, you know, on the county side, they had to make priorities. Their first contract was long-term rental assistance. That was the right first contract. And then we go from there. So even at this table where I've talked about like, hey, we want to be open the hours that the ordinance isn't in place. So that's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm going to have to look multiple places for that funding. I'm going to look to the city and I'll make an ask. I'll keep asking at the county. It's a priority at some point, maybe not today. And then we'll have to find resources from other places as well, because the investment is important to make sure we can answer for our friends. Where do I go if I can't be here? We want to be one of those answers. So I just wanted to lean into the difficulty of funding, and it's sometimes easy to go to them. Not always our answer, even when I want it to be just that easy.
Thank you, Kim. I think that was a beautiful representation of things that I was thinking. And what I'll add to that is our first session, March 31st, 2023, Deanna Negretti did a great presentation about how the supportive housing services funds are being used, how they're impacting, and like the impact that is currently being made right now in our communities. And so the information is out there. It's slow. And I think, you know, part of the conditioning that we all have living in this dominant culture, white supremacy culture, be clear, I'm not calling anybody a white supremacist, saying we live in a white supremacist culture, that has dictated that we want instant gratification. And when it comes to our historically and currently marginalized community, which make no buts about it, I mean, the people experiencing homelessness live in that community. Things move slow. And when we expect instant gratification and things don't happen that way, and we give up on the programs, nothing happens for longer, right? And so that is something that I wanted to add. I think that it's important what Kim was saying. Also wanted to add that keep this at the forefront of your mind. Don't let it move back and be like, well, it's not working immediately in the first year and a half, so it's not going to work. You know, it takes time and it's hard, and people have been clawing and fighting for this for a long time. Okay. This table. Has this table felt like? Okay.
Really much fun using my big girl voice right there. Linda, you guys, if there's nothing else, this funding is life-changing, life-changing. It is, we should be like celebrating and clapping and cheering and all the things, because it's truly been life-changing for our friends. My staff, the word I use for them is hustle. They know how to hustle, and they make it happen for our friends who, like I said, never would we have thought that they'd be in housing. Can I talk about you?
Yeah.
Is getting into housing. It's just so killer. And there's so much more work to do. And we, we have to things crap to do. And then an ordinance gets, thrown down to all of us, all the cities to take on and do all these things with. And it's going to cause hiccups and stuff. And the good work is still being done. And it's awesome. So please know that it's just been the hope and the joy and the fun of making change in people's lives, the opportunity that there's more shelter beds and options for shelter beds. Do you want to go to congregate shelter, non-congregate shelter, a pod? Where do you want to go? What does that look like for you? And you want to sleep on the street? Okay, let's figure out where you can do that safely. The options are just so open right now, and it's such an exciting time to be doing this work and be able to help our friends navigate to where they want to go. And if that's housing, awesome, we're going to get them there, and we can. So it's just yay.
Yay. All right. So did you all feel like your questions, thoughts got adequately responded to? Okay, great. So one thing I want to add and make sure folks know is that this information in the FAQs and the fact sheets are going to be included with the ordinance update, where all the places that we're rolling that out, we're going to include this as well. So very much thank you for that. And Megan, I see you have a microphone, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how we are communicating this out to our communities. And so this is a great, and this is going to be passing the mic around. We have probably like 15 minutes or so to do this. It's just kind of talking about different ways that we can get this information out. Megan's going to talk about what we are doing, and I'd like information and feedback from you all about what we can be doing.
Yes, so this is more of a brainstorming session. These next few materials have not been drafted yet, but there are materials that we had in mind to create and distribute. The first would be a printed flyer that could be displayed at parks, park restrooms, libraries, civic center, recreation facilities, partner organizations. It would have the phone number for Community Connect and or 211. Would love to have feedback on which of those phone numbers or both to include. We could do 2 flyers, one in Spanish, one in English, or we could have a flyer that has both Spanish and English on it. The nature of flyers is that we want them to be visible and then probably direct people to a QR code for more information. So looking for a brainstorm from any ideas you want to throw out on what content to include and the formatting of a flyer that would be displayed to catch people's eye and make them aware of this update, because not everyone is visiting our website and our social media, unfortunately, or reading our newsletters that we mail to them. So, we might have to catch them where they are at recreation centers and community organizations.
Yeah, and there are no wrong answers here, folks. This is legitimately a brainstorm session.
I think the recreational facilities with the flyers, absolutely. Maybe some kind, I don't know what kind of color or photograph, something to catch an eye, but also perhaps staff can be, have you seen our flyer? But, in view of the public. I can also speak to, I don't know if we're there yet, about the downtown Tuesday market, Saturday market. There's a lot of opportunity there for volunteers maybe to go through the crowd. I know a few coffee shops, one in particular, Bennett's. You bring your own lawn chair, whatever, and they sit out. I don't know how legal it is, but they're out there, we're having coffee and, talking about everything and anything. And it's a great opportunity when people go by. So if the volunteers are out and about, I know the Hillsboro Parks is there, usually the police are there, the information booth, but it's the hands-on and the meet and greet that I think will work. And I do believe people will be very responsive to a human face and touch.
Thank you. And Megan, for your sanity, Mandy is also taking notes.
Washington County about 2 weeks ago put out all of their emergency resources on a QR code, and it comes up really quick. It's easy to navigate, so I'd encourage that to be on there as well. And I personally like a single flyer, bilingual. I think it shows us as a community.
Thank you.
So That work? Okay. So I'm very supportive of this. I would just say to please be sure to reach out to park staff in terms of the managers for facilities, or in terms of like at park sites, I would say that location is important. Also the type of material that you use, because if it's something that isn't waterproof, it's not going to hold up very well. I'm not sure if these are intended to be just like a short-term, constantly changing type of communication, or if it's you put it up for a year, or what that looks like. But just we don't have like, bulletin boards in the parks, for example. So the question is where we put it at a park. So just love the idea, but just make sure to engage park staff, please.
I also agree with both languages on there, because sometimes we'll give an English and a Spanish and only the English one gets put up. So if we have both languages on there, they don't really have a choice for businesses that want to help communicate. I think through the chamber's channels of business owners and things like that in Hillsboro. But then it might get confusing about like, this is just in Hillsboro. So just make sure that if it goes through that method, that's clear. I feel like I'm giving away the vote because there was a change of management in the city and I took over something, but I could give it back temporarily. And that is the compact garbage cans in downtown have room for a poster in them that we could put it in there, and at all the markets, people would see it and stuff too, that are coming to La Strada and all the other events downtown. So I even have the dimensions and everything. So if you want to post them and put them on there, it's a nice, clear place that they would show up.
I think Linda had, if you will just hand it to Linda. Oh, okay. All right, who else? Okay, yeah, no problem.
It's about the communication. I don't know if the city would do it, but the reader board that's at the Walters Center. I mean, they advertise musicians, etc., and there might be something that could be put there politely.
I would definitely need to talk to park staff about that one. But we have put out reader boards, actually the traffic ones, when we were doing our police review and advancement engagement. We actually used a public works traffic reader board for that.
I don't have letters for that.
There are hardly any letters, so it's difficult. But yeah, thank you.
8 letters, 3 lines with 8 letters.
It would say camping update. Now visit website or something, but yeah. Thank you. Okay. We have a camping rules webpage planned. It would be a brand new webpage. It would live under and near our homelessness webpage that already exists and has a ton of information. This is where everything and anything hopefully will live and be accessible to folks, with the caveat that not everyone has access to the internet. But we want everything to live in one place and everything to be organized. Our basic outline would be a short intro, why the camping rules need to be updated, why we updated them, where camping is allowed, and link to the ordinance and the manager's administrative rules. We are planning to create a GIS map, which is an interactive map that you can zoom in and zoom out on and see all the different locations where camping is and is not allowed. Camping on private property, brochure, PDF, the FAQ will be there. The trifold we all discussed will be there and available. And then also a link to Engage Hillsboro, which details this entire process from start to finish, starting in last March, in case people want to know how we got there and how we engage the community. What are we missing?
I got it.
I have a clarification question. So the things that you say that you can print the PDF, they will be not just PDF, the content will be embedded on the website so that it's translatable into all languages, right? Because PDFs aren't translatable with the Google Translate to multiple languages. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because when stuff's just loaded up on a PDF, you're stuck in it.
Yes, the FAQ will be translated. The webpage itself will be translatable. And I'm hoping that we can translate the ordinance itself and the manager's administrative rules as well, at least to Spanish. Typically, we don't translate city council materials.
But if it's listed in English, If it's listed in English on the website, not in a PDF, just in HTML, then it, because now Google has added like even, it's not just, when you translate a page, it's not just Spain, Spanish, you can pick a little bit more specific, and then all the other languages that we have too. So that's, that was just something that I've seen people, I've heard people say of like it was in PDF, I couldn't help show it to somebody in a different language because you couldn't show a different translation.
Yep, that might have been me, long-term web team.
Just want to add, as I mentioned before, any documents that we have or anything for the city of Hillsboro can be translated into any language. You just have to request it. While we try to have Spanish more readily available because it makes sense for our community. We can have any language. And we're also working on, again, slow process, getting access to the I Speak cards that the county has, so that anybody that speaks any of, I think like 30 different languages that are available for those cards can just hand a card that they can keep in their wallet to any city staff. And that will say what language they speak, and we'll have access to the numbers for like the 24-hour language hotline.
So I just wanted to add that this is not just a city of Hillsboro thing. We could probably reach out to our partners and do video. Thinking of Veronica Vasquez, or is it Vasquez? Her, and we have CBOs that we can partner with, creating a short video. Sometimes people hearing it and listening to it might be able to grasp the information easier.
And then you talked about the same too, saying, yeah, short videos to have people take it. Some people like consume a lot like YouTube videos and stuff like that. So like good to have a video explain all this stuff and maybe break it down, the chunks, and covering each thing.
I think we're going to get David and Tina together to make a TikTok for this. That'll work best. All right, just for time's sake, we're going to move on to the next of these discussion questions.
Not much to introduce here, just a brainstorm on the private camping rules fact sheet, how that may differ from the public camping rules fact sheet, and what would be important to include. And lastly, who do we need to distribute the private camping rules to? How do we meet people where they are and get that information in folks' hands who may want to host campers or have other questions about it?
That seems like it would be one that would be good to mail, because that is assuming that somebody owns that private residence, so you can more easily mail that one.
I think definitely having like drawings of examples of how that would work, maybe like that would be really great to envision. Like, would I do this on my property, and show, and also just to kind of show neighbors that wouldn't do it, like the expectations around it would be good. I don't think you're going to have a hard time finding ways to distribute that, because there's a lot of people out there that care and are interested. So I think when it goes out, people will just be calling to ask about it.
I think that's really cool, and you sparked an idea for me, not just having drawings and pictures of like what this looks like for each individual property, but maybe something that those property owners can give to their neighbors to say like, this is what is happening. Here's why I'm doing this, and here's blah, blah, blah.
That makes me think maybe you should have a toolkit for property owners that want to do this, that includes things like communication materials with their neighbors, because I have a feeling they're going to be left to do that on their own. In terms of the materials, it's really important to be clear and bold that this is an approval process. You cannot just do this on your own decision. And so that's going to be really important.
Mandy, is that accurate in terms of the approval process? Because I think in terms of a sanctioned campsite, it's an approval process, but for
So the city, you have to register with the city, but we're not approving them. So, but I think your point still stands, that it's clear that you need to register the site.
There's one thing I just want to add about registering, and then the city is not taking total responsibility. I have an issue with that because I'm thinking of, I think the police have landlord forum. Are you familiar with that, David? And I think it was a good suggestion about communication. I'm not saying the city has to do this, but to have a private property owner wanting to do that and then getting approval, how informed are they? How, I'm not saying trained, but I mean, there's obviously rules and regulations you have to go through. And how is that being instructed by the city in their approval? Is it just giving them a piece of paper and saying, you need to follow these rules?
So we're working through that right now. So the registration form is going to be laid out where all the rules are laid out in an affirmative manner, where the applicant has to identify, yes, I understand that that is a rule, they have to initial next to it.
I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here because I think it's incredibly noble to do. But I spoke with the lawyer and I said, is there going to be any notification process to that? And you're shaking your head, no. Do you anticipate any difficulties with that? Because I certainly do. Yeah, and you're laughing.
No, that's why planning is directly involved, because I expect that the neighbors are going to come to planning or to David's team and ask the questions. What does this look like? What is my neighbor allowed to do?
Technical issue. Is going in planning, is it going before hearings board? Why? I said, is it going before hearing and planning? Usually there's hearings about that. And I know you don't want to open up cans of worms here, but goodness. Yeah, here we go. We're laughing again.
Marcus is just giving the planner the time check because I'm about to dive deep into process. No, so to Mandy's original point, this is not an approval. It's purely a registration, and not everything that goes through planning goes to a hearings body. There's plenty of stuff that we do at a staff level. So this is purely a recognition that a property owner know they are coming in to register their private property for private camping. We are accepting that. They're acknowledging all the rules and requirements they need to abide by. And that's all we're doing.
Oh,
I'm just saying, you're gonna have an issue.
so I'm gonna cap that discussion. Is there any other discussion about this particular piece before we move on? Okay.
So I just think it's important, obviously, they're not going to be taking all kinds of training and stuff to set up camp on their property, but there's new experience every day when you're working with people, right? And with this population, there's, all kinds of different factors that play in, but I think it'd be important when they go in to get everything set up, if there's some sort of something provided to them, letting them know information like contacting Hawthorne and different emergency services for people's needs.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Megan. All right.
Thanks everyone so much for all your feedback.
Yes. So the last piece here, I think this is like the last, okay, yes. Whew, almost there. The last piece here is for me. So finally, August time. So I wanted your honest feedback about how this process has been for you all, right? I'm new to the city. It's been less than 6 months. Frankly, I'm new to community engagement. It's been just a little over 3 years for me. And so I want some just kind of raw, honest feedback about how this went for you, what worked, what didn't work. what you would like to see different in any aspect of the community engagement process. So again, kind of open forum discussion as well. I have no idea where the other mic is. I think Megan stole it. Okay, so anybody want to start off with any thoughts about this?
Appreciate it, Marcus, for having this. I'm trying this my first time doing some community engagement over an ordinance and getting community involved. I've never really seen something like this. I think they did a really good job of like framing it. The only thing I have feedback on is kind of framing the activities a little line with more of the ordinance itself or what we're actually talking about. I feel like for sometimes we had discussion around homelessness or this, it like derp off into so many different things, especially like the April. It was kind of confusing on what we're with the survey, how we were like, that's good, we got that feedback, but it was kind of like very confusing how we were tying that into the ordinance. So like for stuff like this, it's just kind of like if we're focusing on this, kind of streamline everything towards this. But it's good to have the bigger conversation about what to do. But I feel like sometimes we got lost in those big conceptual conversations when you were trying to like, we're focusing on the ordinance.
Thank you. Just confirming, Mandy, you're okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to say that it's an honor to be here, especially me being homeless and, having experience living on the streets. I never thought I would, be invited to come to one of these things. And it's a beautiful thing to know that there's people out here that actually care about the homeless and want improvement done to better our lives and have an easier time being on the streets. Thank you all.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay.
I know that this wasn't in your control entirely, but it seems rushed. I mean, and I think, and right now, and you've come into a environment at the city that all community engagement's been rushed over the last few, since COVID hit really. So not your fault, and you did a good job managing that. So good job. But I think we'll look forward to hopefully being able to anticipate needs and have this engagement level at a slower pace. With maybe multiple times to go back to the community. The other thing was, I think a lot of us were surprised at the last session where we were with the drafts. And I think you gave us a draft at the beginning and it just wasn't clear like where that draft was coming from. And so I think there was just, it was all new to us. We were learning so much that first day. So I think that, I know that some of us were frustrated, like, oh, it's going to city council already. We're not going to see a draft. So just if it's around policy or something, just being clear, like who's already had input, like where has it already come from before it got to us? Because you told us where it was going, but not where it had already been. So, but good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And commenting on the rush thing, yes, please give us that feedback because hopefully we never have to do this in 5 months ever again.
I actually wanted to say the opposite. I've been involved with 3 other cities in doing their ordinance, and none of them have been as thoughtful and intentional and as slow as this process has. I actually told Marcus at the city council meeting that it was being discussed at, which is that he really, and his process has really resonated with me, that classic quote, which is what you do is important, but how you do it is more important. And this has been the best process I have seen for all of the ordinances that I've been involved in.
That's good to hear.
Expectations for you, Marcus.
Good. We need to have high expectations, especially around community voice. Like, please hold us to a high bar.
Added to with the community engagement, I think it would be good. I don't know if you could like set time for us to do, but like how to allocate also just to go to like the city council. If we just thinking like something like this city council meeting, like acquire us going to one of the city council meetings for the readings, because it's very interesting for me to see their feedback on it. I went, I think Linda, you were there too, the one, and it's like kind of seeing them there and giving their feedback and like how they were thinking about it, but also be good for be there to like, for public comment too, for us to give our perspective to the city councilors.
So just to make sure I'm wrapping around my head around what you're saying, are you saying like I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Are you? I'm gonna cry. Are you suggesting that as built-in part of the process, like maybe having like a representative from this group, like as part of the council sessions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Mic off.
Fridays and a Friday before a 3-day holiday is difficult. And I know, again, you were rushed, and it's really concerning to me that so many non-city participants in this haven't been at all this. And I feel like you guys asked us really clearly, like only sign up if you can come to all 3 sessions. And I know that's not on you. I don't know how you changed that expectation. I think that, a lot of us in nonprofits, we get pulled into a lot of meetings, and maybe just encouraging those of us that we can send. We don't always have to be the ones there, because I think that's what happens is sometimes the leaders try to always be the one there, but they can send a representative.
I can speak to that briefly. I think that we as government haven't earned the trust for folks to show up when we ask them to. And so it will be helpful, if you all that have been here throughout this whole process can relay that to your community, right? Because we are trying to do this intentionally and meaningfully, and we want to build that trust with the community. Trust is lost in buckets, right? And we've lost a lot of buckets of trust, and it's only gained in drips. And so we are working towards that. And it's something that is, again, takes time, but we have to keep showing up. And that's my.
Please let us be part of that communication back, because I literally have taken so many surveys to 10th Avenue, like they have so much survey fatigue and aren't seeing any results. And so I think if we can talk about those of us that, representative of different parts of the community can be the voice of that or whatever, please let us help. Please make us help you with that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Really good feedback, you all. Really appreciate it. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you all so much. With that, I'm gonna move us to our last slide and just say a really huge, massive thank you to you all. This process has been long, it has been tedious, it has been frustrating, right? And so I just really appreciate you all sticking through with this and being respectful to each other and following those participant agreements that we started with. I really enjoyed this. Like I said at the beginning, this is very bittersweet to me because I did enjoy this. I love peopling and just kind of being around and being involved with this. And I really appreciated you all kind of making this space feel welcoming for everybody. And so I'm just going to end with a quote by Steve Goodyear, who's an author. And he says, "We don't get harmony when everybody sings the same note. Only notes that are different can harmonize." The same is true with people.
Awesome. I love your quotes.
And thank you all.
I'm just kidding.